The 54th session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 18th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Risa Ontiveros will lead the chamber in prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. A prayer for the women through the ages by Reverend Jude Geiger, a Unitarian Universalist minister serving the community of Huntington, New York. Spirit of renewal, God of many names, and one transforming and abundant love. We turn this month in our nation's life to reflect on the stories, the heritage, and the struggles of women throughout the ages. We seek to learn from all those voices that have been left unheard. May we pause before the silences of the ages, find who has been left out, and craft new ways of inclusion for every week and every month. May this spiritual practice bring out the voices of all those struggling, all those left apart. May we let go of our assumptions and cold comforts of what is the normal to live by, unless it be a standard that is rooted in compassion, in inclusivity, in diversity. May this month of reflection teach us to search for those stories that are different from our own. Mother of possibilities, in the finding, may we come to know ourselves changed, renewed where we are dry, hopeful where we are lost, and open where we are shut. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Secretary, will please call the roll.
Roll call of members, the Honorable Senators Angara,
Present.
Hinay,
Present.
Cayetano,
Present.
De Lima, De La Rosa, Drilon,
Present.
Gatchalian, O,
Present. Present po. Present.
Gordon,
Tanggalin lang natin ABCD.
Gordon,
Present.
Ontiveros,
Present.
Lacson, Lapid,
Present.
Marcos,
Present.
Pacquiao,
Is there?
Pangilinan,
Present.
Pimentel III,
Present.
Poe,
Present.
Recto,
Is there? Is there?
Revilla Jr.,
Present.
Tolentino, Villanueva, Villar,
Present.
Zubiri. Senate President Soto III is present.
With 8 senators physically present and 15 senators virtually present for a total of 23, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. You're the leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 52nd session, Monday, March 1, 2021, and consider the same as approved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none. The journal is approved.
And before we take up other matters, Mr. President, we'd just like to greet our Secretary, Senate Secretary, Attorney Villarica. Happy 35th birthday! Congratulations! Happy birthday! Yes, always looking youthful.
Happy
Youthful
birthday
looking.
to Secretary Villarica. You are now qualified to run for the Senate.
That our SecGen is blooming, Mr.
Blooming.
President.
Ah, blooming. Always blooming. Always blooming. Mr.
The
President,
leader.
yes, to continue with the journals, I move that we defer with the approval of the journal of the 53rd session, Tuesday, March 2, 2021 at the later hours. It's still being prepared, Mr. President.
All right. Hearing no objection, the journal of the 53rd is deferred.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will proceed with reference of business.
Reference of business, Bills on first reading. Senate Number 2078, an act strengthening the wildlife conservation and protection mechanism in the Philippines, amending for this purpose Republic Act Number 9147, otherwise known as the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Villar.
To refer to the Committees on Environment and Finance.
Senate Number 2079, an act providing for a revised Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
Refer to the Committees on Environment and Finance.
Senate Number 2080, an act establishing a tertiary hospital under the control, supervision, and management of the Department of Health in the city of Calbayog, Samar, to be known as the Samar Island Medical Center, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Health and Finance.
Senate Number 2081, an act declaring the first day of February of every year as National Hijab Day and promoting an understanding of the Muslim tradition of wearing a hijab, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
Referred to the Committees on Cultural Communities and Women.
Senate Number 2082, an act creating one additional branch of the Regional Trial Court Second Judicial Region to be stationed in the province of Isabela, Municipality of Cabagan, and appropriating funds therefore, amending for the purpose sections 14J and 29 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Organization Act of 1980 as amended, introduced by Senator Binay.
To the Committees on Justice and Finance.
Senate Number 2083, an act modernizing the Philippine Orthopedic Center, upgrading its service facilities and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Health and Finance.
Resolution, PS Resolution Number 672, resolution urging the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the Philippines' drop in the global food security ranking and poor scores on food security indicators of affordability and quality and safety, with the end in view of identifying urgent and necessary interventions in agriculture and the national food supply chain, looking into the future of food security and safety in the country and ensuring access of every Filipino to nutritious, affordable, and safe food, introduced by Senator Revilla Jr.
Referred to the Committee on Agriculture.
Communication, letters from the Office of the President of the Philippines transmitting to the Senate two original copies of Republic Act Number 11524 entitled An Act Creating the Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund, providing for its management and utilization, reconstituting for the purpose the Philippine Coconut Authority Board and for other purposes, which was signed by President Rodrigo Roa Duterte.
To the Archives. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're just conferring with two of our colleagues who will be presenting bills today. Kung sino pong mauna. The senior or the junior of the PMA, Philippine Military Academy.
The senior always is preference.
Okay, okay, Mr. President, we'll continue with the agenda. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1832 under Committee Report number 111.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 1832 is in order.
This is the strengthening of the Bureau of Fire Protection, Mr. President. May we recognize our distinguished colleague, Senator Bato de la Rosa, to sponsor and to amend. Well, we'll ask first, Mr. President, if they have committee amendments. Mr. President.
All right, Senator Ronald de la Rosa is recognized. And the period of amendments.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
President and the
Maybe.
Majority Leader.
Do you have committee amendments or individual amendments?
So may I make a suggestion, Mr. President? We can go page by page, which is the
Yes.
tradition that we do.
Yes, if we're in the period of individual amendments, it's best that we follow the suggestion of the Majority Leader. We do page by page. Okay na, kopya. Let's start with page 1.
Mr. President, for
Yes,
the
sir.
record, the amendments I will introduce today are consolidated amendments proposed by this representation, Senator President Pro Tempore, Ralph Ricto, and Senator Win Gatchalian. With the permission of the body, I would like to introduce the following amendments. Mr. President, on Section 1, On page 1, line 3, delete the phrase of 2020. The section now reads, Section 1, this act shall be known as the BFP Modernization Act. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Here's none. Adopted.
Mr. President, on Section 2, still on page 1, delete lines 7 to 9 and replace it with, towards this end, the Senate shall formulate and implement plans and programs to enhance and modernize the Bureau of Fire Protection, expand its mandate and capability, and ensure its responsiveness to the changing needs of the community. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Here's none. Adopted.
Mr. President,
We go to page 2. Any amendments on page 2?
Mr. President, may I correct my previous amendment, Mr. President?
Which one? Still on page 1?
The Section 2, Mr. President, page 1. Delete line 7 to 9 and replace it with, towards this end, the state shall formulate and implement plans and programs to enhance and modernize the Bureau of Fire Protection, expand its mandate and capability, and ensure its responsiveness to the changing needs of the community. I so move, Mr. President.
All right. The correction is instead of Senate, it's the state. Any
State.
objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Mr. President, on Section 3, on page 2,
Page 2. Any? Oh, yes. Go
delete
ahead.
lines 3 to 16
3 to 16.
and
3 to
replace
16.
it with Section 3, strengthening of the Bureau of Fire Protection. The Bureau of Fire Protection, BFP, created under Republic Act number 6975, otherwise known as the Department of Interior and Local Government Act of 1990, as amended, shall exercise the following powers and functions. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Here's none. Adopted.
Mr. President, still on Section 3, under subsection A, on
Your-
page 2,
Oh, still on page 2. Go ahead.
delete the entire subsection A in lines 17 to 28 and replace it with prevent and suppress all destructive fires and buildings, houses, and other structures, including those that occur in economic zones, agro-industrial economic zones, free ports, and special economic zones, IT parks, centers, tourism, economic zone, and other similar entities, forest, land, transportation, vehicles, and equipment, ships or vessel docked at piers or wharves or anchored in major seaports, petroleum industry installations, and airports, and in the event of plane crashes and other similar incidents, provided that BFP shall collaborate with various local government units, LGUs, on fire protection services, such as fire prevention and preparedness, response planning and information sharing, as well as on handling fire management and operational issues. The last proviso was proposed by Senator Gatchalian and accepted by this representation. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Here's none. Adopted.
Still on Section 3, under subsection B, on page 3,
We go to page 3. Go ahead.
delete the entire subsection B in lines 1 to 6 and replace it with respond to natural or man-made disasters and other emergencies, including the conduct of rescue operations, medical emergency, containment of hazardous materials, hazmat, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive CBRNA materials, provided that the BFP shall actively coordinate and cooperate with the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council and the LGUs on the disaster response, risk reduction, and management in line with Republic Act number 7160 or the Local Government Code of 1991 and Republic Act number 10121 for the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010. The last proviso was also proposed by Senator Gatchalian. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There is none, adopted.
Mr. President, still on Section 3, under subsection D, on
D.
page 3,
Yeah.
delete lines 14 to 16 and replace it with,
To 16, huh?
yes sir,
Oh.
require building owners to submit plans and specifications of their respective building and other pertinent documents as may be deemed necessary. On the same page,
Period. Period. After necessary.
uh,
Oh. And
no,
then,
no, Mr. President.
Are you continuing with letter D or,
Continue, Mr. President.
okay.
On the same page, line 22, after the word permit,
Oh, wait. Let's adopt first the line 14 to 16. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. Okay, you can
Thank
go
you,
to
Mr. President.
line 22.
on the same page, line 22, after the word permit, insert the phrase in accordance with Republic Act number 11032 for the ease of doing business and efficient government service delivery act of 2018.
Is that it?
Yes, Mr. President.
Are you moving to adopt?
Not yet, Mr. President. May I continue?
Go ahead.
Hence, Section 3D will now read as D. Require building owners to submit plans and specifications of the respective building and other pertinent documents as may be deemed necessary by by BFP, and evaluate the same to ensure compliance with Republic Act number 9514 and other applicable codes and standards. For this purpose, a fire safety evaluation clearance shall be issued as a prerequisite for the issuance of the building permit in accordance with Republic Act number 11032 for the ease of doing business and efficient government service delivery act of 2018. I so move, Mr. President.
Mr.
Any
President,
objection?
before we
Senator
tackle
Zubiri is
that
recognized.
particular amendment, being the author of the Ease of Doing Business Act, may I just request the good gentleman to give me in writing the particular amendment so that I can study quickly and go back to it after? If it's okay.
Yes, it's okay, Mr. President.
I just request from the staff.
So we will
Skip this one first. Opo. Can we recognize Senator Jinggoy po?
we will do a Pia Cayetano. Parking. The
Mr.
minority
President.
leader is recognized.
Mr. President, and while this provision is part, may I request the good sponsor to study how we can combine in just one issuance the of fire safety evaluation clearance and the building permit. In other words, just in one document, instead of requiring the building owners to have two clearances, which would require separate issuances and will not be consistent with the ease of doing business in our view. So may we request again to reiterate the good sponsor to study how we can combine the issuance of the fire safety clearance, fire safety evaluation clearance, and the building permit as one document. Just a matter of a procedure of being consistent with pursuing the policy of the ease of doing business.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, Mr. President, as well as additional information, my only concern about the amendment made by the good gentleman was there was a portion there that he mentioned and other pertinent documents that may be required. Under the ease of doing business kasi, Mr. President, we already finalized the list. Kasi yung isang issue na nangyayari sa iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno, pag hindi nila clarify yung listahan na hinihingi nila, namumunga ng bagong listahan para tumagal ang proseso at dyan po nagkakaroon ng lagayan. Kaya I'll just study quickly the proposal.
Yes, para dumulas.
Opo. Part na muna po natin. Sandali.
All right.
Yeah,
So it's part at the moment. Any other amendment on page 3? Sponsor, Mr. Sponsor, page 3. Any other amendment?
no more, Mr. President. I so move, Mr.
Okay,
President.
let's move on to page 4. Page 4, do you have any amendments before?
No, Mr. President, there is still, there are still amendments on page 3, Mr. President.
Page 3, okay.
Yes. Still on section 3, under subsection F, on
F.
page 3,
Line
line
27.
27, insert letter S in the word office. I so move, Mr. President.
Offices. Any objection? Editorial amendment?
Huh?
Hearing no objection, adopted.
For line 6.
Also on page 3, line 28, after the word formulate, insert the phrase and implement. I so move,
Fine.
Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 3, line 29, insert the phrase with prior consultation from the LGUs. Mr. President, this is from Senator Gatchalian.
Where? Insert where?
On page 3, line 29, insert the phrase with prior consultation from the LGUs.
Where? Where in line 29? After BFP, after monitor,
After BFP, Mr. President.
after BFP. All right. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President.
No more on page 3.
Still on page 3, Mr. President.
Go ahead.
Section 3, page 4. We're already on page 4, Mr. President.
Page 4.
Yeah, Mr. President.
Letter,
On page 4, line 8.
line 8.
Yes, Mr. President. After the word suppression, insert the phrase fire inspection and clearance. I so move, Mr. President.
Fire inspection and clearance. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Also on page 4, line 10, after
Line
the
10.
word operations, delete the semicolon,
Okay.
face it with colon, and insert the phrase, provided that the conduct of such training must be in coordination with the LGUs. Hence, Section 3H will now read as, conduct training of its personnel and officers, including fire volunteers, fire safety practitioners, and fire volunteer organizations pertaining to the fire prevention and suppression, fire inspection and clearance, investigation, disaster preparedness, rescue, emergency medical, hazmat, CBRNE, and other operations, provided that the conduct of such training must be in coordination with the LGUs. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, still on section 3 under subsection J, on page 4, line 15.
Anterior amendments, Mr.
There
President.
is an anterior amendment by Senator
Yes.
Villanueva.
Yes, Mr.
Go ahead.
President, with the indulgence of our distinguished colleague, the author of this a very important measure. First of all, I'd like to put on record and express my full support for the modernization and strengthening of the workforce of the Bureau of Fire Protection. And during the interpellation, this representation and together with the sponsor agreed that the role of our firefighters is no longer limited to fire-related emergencies as what happened during the in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. So on page 4, Mr. President, line 13, I'd like to move, with the permission of the author, to insert a comma after the word units and delete the word end. So on line 14, on the same page, insert a comma after the acronym DILG and insert the Department of Transportation, DOTR, and economic zones. Hence, the subsection I, Mr. President, under the powers and functions of the BFP shall read as, conduct monthly fire prevention campaigns and information drive in partnership with the local government units, comma, the Department of Interior and Local Government, DILG, comma, the Department of Transportation, DOTR, comma, and economic zones.
What does the sponsor say?
Yes, Mr. President, I agree.
Thank you.
Accept. Any objection?
Accept.
Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you very much.
All right. You may continue, Mr. Sponsor, on page 4.
Yes, Mr. President. Hence, section 3, on page 4, line 15, delete the phrase a contract or transaction and replace it with contracts, agreements, or similar undertaking. Hence, Section 3J will now read as enter into contracts, agreements, or similar undertaking for the acquisition, ownership, possession, use, administration, lease, disposition, or acceptance of real or personal property in its
Yes.
name. I so move, Mr. President.
Before you do so, the minority leader is seeking the floor. Senator Drilon, go ahead.
Just a parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President, and an anterior amendment because I was not able to follow it. I'm talking about page 3 and referring to the establishment of regional offices. Has this been presented and approved by the body, Mr. President?
It remains. It has not been changed. He only added the letter S to offices, to office.
So is this a committee amendment, Mr. President? It is in bold. What is this?
This is incorporated in the bill, in the proposal of the committee.
All right. May I, with your permission, Mr. President, and permission of the body, can we ask to take the floor on an anterior amendment on page 3 and letter G on
Well,
page?
just to finish letter J, which has already been read. If you don't
Okay,
mind,
fine.
let us approve that. Then we will go back. Any objection to the amendment on the line 15? Hearing none. Adopted. Now, an anterior amendment by the minority leader. You may proceed.
Yes, on page 3, line 27 to 32. May I move that we delete this? Establishing a regional office for the BFP is not at all necessary because the plans and programs and the policies can be crafted by the head office as there cannot be different policies for different regions as this is fire prevention. We have very serious reservations about establishing regional offices because of the budgetary requirements, Mr. President.
What
We
does
move
the
to
sponsor
the-
say?
Mr. President, actually, this particular provision was just placed in this bill to formalize everything. But in actuality, we are already maintaining regional offices of the Bureau of Fire Protection, Mr. President. And because if we do not uh, uh, establish regional offices, then there is a great disconnect, Mr. President, with other line agencies of the government because it is a customary and it is already a practice that all national offices are having regional offices in the different regions of the archipelago, Mr. President.
Allow me to play devil's advocate. You said there are already regional offices. Then why are we establishing regional offices?
Well,
Oh, line 27, letter F says establish regional offices which shall formulate and so hindi ba maintain? If there are already regional offices,
just want to institutionalize the establishment of the regional offices, Mr. President. But we can amend that portion if you want to amend
No.
that.
no,
Okay,
the proposal of the minority leader is to delete the entire letter F. I'm just playing a devil's advocate. I do not have any strong position for or against.
Yeah, actually, Mr. President, I would like to go with your recommendation that instead of establishing, maintain, we change the word maintain.
What does the minority leader say then?
Firstly, how were these regional offices established if the impression that I get is that they are just confirming or validating the existence of these regional offices by virtue of paragraph F on lines 27 to 32. The impression that I get, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sponsor, is that you are, as you said, just confirming what is in actual existence on the ground. So the question that we have is, how were these regional offices established? By what authority were they established?
I will find out, Mr. President.
Yes, please.
Can we have a 1-minute suspension, Majority Leader? Session suspended. Please clarify this, the issue. The Minority Leader, the question posed by the Minority Leader, or the amendment, was to remove this particular letter F, but it appears that this has already been established. The other chief of the PNP chief was giving us the answer to the question of Senator Drilon. Are you ready to do that, Senator De La Rosa, or are you
Yes,
going
Mr.
to
President.
go ahead?
Yeah, I would like to thank my upper class Senator Lacson for finding it out for me, Mr. President. Thank you, sir, for finding it out. Iba na yung matagal sa serbisyo, Mr. President. At alam niya yung lahat ng batas na pertaining to all these organizations.
Mm.
To answer the issue raised by the Minority Leader, Mr. President, what was the legal basis for the establishment of these regional offices that I have said that in actuality are already existing? Are already existing.
All right.
According to RA
9263.
9263, Mr. President, an act professionalizing the BGMP and BFP. It says here that the BFP shall establish, operate, and maintain their respective regional offices in each of the administrative regions of the country, which shall be respectively headed by a regional director or fire protection and a regional director of jail management and penology with the rank of senior superintendent. He shall be respectively assisted by the following officers with the rank of so on and so forth, Mr. President.
Nevertheless, I think Minority Leader, that answers the question. They are existing. They are existing already. So may I suggest that instead of your proposal to delete, let us just remove the word or replace the word established with maintain.
No objection to that. I am withdrawing my original amendment and accepting the amendment to my amendment coming from the Senate President.
All right. Any objection? There being none. Adopted.
Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Minority Leader, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. President, another question, another anterior amendment, but I preface it with a questions for proper information. Are there on page 4, lines 1, 2, and 3 refers to the establishment and maintenance of regional fire laboratories and research and testing facilities complete with equipment for this purpose. Do we have to have regional testing centers? Can we not just have one laboratory and research and testing facility to be maintained in the head office, just like the crime laboratories of the Philippine National Police? They are nationally based so that there's only one crime laboratory. But here, we are establishing regional fire laboratory and research and testing facilities. Again, from the point of view of the budget, is this really necessary? Or can this function not be performed by one national fire laboratory and research and testing facility?
Mr. President, it is their dream. That is why when we say modernization, we hope that every region is up to the task. If
Yes.
these requirements can be addressed at the regional level, then so much the better.
Yes, but you know, Mr. President, we can achieve modernization with reasonable expenses. We are not a rich country which is oozing with resources. We are not objecting to a laboratory and research and testing facility. The Philippine National Police has a national crime, testing, how do you call it, crime laboratory. But there's only one. We do not maintain regional crimes offices because with this can be used as a basis for establishing all kinds of regional offices. I mean, all kinds of laboratory you have. How many regions in this country? 15? Do we need 15 or 18 regional fire laboratories?
Perhaps, may I volunteer a point of information also, no? That will have the two perspectives. Presently, perhaps what you should do instead of regional would be, what do you call this, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. Because area, because that is the problem now of the Philippine National Police and the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency. When there are interceptions of illegal drugs, say in Sultan Kudarat, they have to bring it to, like what happened to Cebu, the Cebu airport. They had to bring it over to Manila to test the quantity or the quality of the seized drugs. They seized 10 kilos in the Cebu airport. When it reached the laboratory in Manila, it became 10 kilos of gao-gao. So
Yes.
that's the reason for must be a proximity of laboratories in the different areas na medyo malapit at para hindi nangyayari yung centralized masyado. Pag centralized, doon nagkakaroon ng delikado.
Mr.
Majority
President.
Leader.
Yeah, Mr. President, may I just interject as well to maybe assist probably on a little information. During our discussions of the ease of doing business, I remember some of our private sector members during the TWG were actually complaining ang matagal pong pag-release ng laboratory findings, kaya natatagalan po sila mag-collect ng insurance claims. So and the complaint was the laboratory findings would take very long. So it's a good possibility, Mr. President, or a good compromise kung meron pong Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao para mapabilis po yung laboratory findings after a fire. But I agree with the Senate Minority Floor Leader, having 15 or 6, I think we're 16 regions now, I think may not be feasible. But maybe island geographic areas of the Philippines probably would be a bit more acceptable to our Minority Floor Leader.
Minority Leader. Yes.
Yes, Mr. President, I therefore would propose an amendment so that we can amend line 1 to say instead of regional, we can say establish and maintain fire laboratory and research and testing facilities, complete equipment, for one for the Visayas, one for Luzon, one for the Visayas, one for Mindanao, or subject to style.
I agree, Mr. President.
The Senator Lacson is recognized.
Mr. President, may I, with the indulgence of the Minority Leader, how about insert the phrase subject to availability of funds? So it will not also preempt the Bureau of Fire to establish regional laboratories in the future if they have the available funds. Because if we limit it to Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, and and funds become available, then they're restricted.
No, Mr. President, from the point of view of the budget and efficiencies of the bureaucracy and take into account the size of our bureaucracy, I think it is reasonable to have one laboratory for Luzon, one laboratory for the Visayas, one laboratory for Mindanao. Because we know the bureaucracy, Mr. President. You give them authority, they will justify why that authority should be utilized. You allow them regional offices subject to availability of funds. I can assure you, funds will be available. So the best way is to limit the discretion, as suggested by the Senate President, 3 area research facilities, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao.
Anyway, Mr. President, I leave it to the other chief PNP.
Right. You accept the proposal. It is now being proposed by the minority leader to adopt the proposal of the presiding officer.
What can I do, Mr. President? The proposal was very well thought of, and even majority of us will agree to that. So I
Okay.
accept, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted. Still on page 4.
Just for clarification, Mr. President,
Ah.
today we only have one laboratory.
Wala yata eh.
Wala tayong laboratory. We have no laboratory.
Meron ba?
Merong
Meron din,
one
ano?
ngayon dito sa Luzon.
So isa lang. So
oh.
far, isa lang laboratory.
Isa lang.
So
Alright.
from 1 to 3 is a good development.
Yeah.
The improvement.
Having in Visayas,
It's
it's
already enough
good enough.
act
Yeah.
of modernizing.
Mm. All right. Any other amendment on page 4? Sorry. I'm sorry. The gentleman from the west.
Malapit ka na, malapit ka na.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just an anterior amendment, if the sponsor would permit. It's on. It's more grammatical or linguistic rather than substantive. This is page 2, line 17, Mr. President.
Page 2, line 17. Go ahead.
Yes, it says the Bureau of Fire Protection, or BFP, for Fire Bureau shall have the following powers and functions. Then in line 17, it says A, responsible for the prevention. So I think we should replace responsible with responsibility for the prevention, because otherwise it's not, doesn't quite read correctly, Mr. President. If the sponsor will accept.
Wait, the sponsor earlier deleted this.
Okay.
Replaced it. What was the replacement? Line 17 to 28. You replaced it eh. Line 17
How does
to
it read
28.
now, Mr. President? Yeah.
Let me check
Prevent
naging prevent and suppress na eh.
and suppress, Mr. President.
Prevent
That's
and
better. I think that's
suppress.
better because the rest of the provision is worded in verbs, Mr. President. So I think that's correct. Thank you. Another one is on page 3, line 27, Mr. President.
Okay, go ahead.
Shouldn't it be established regional offices rather than office?
It was already amended also, I'm sorry. It now reads maintain regional offices which shall,
Okay.
et cetera.
Are we now? Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I have subsequent amendments. I'll raise my hand when the proper time
Page
comes.
4. Still on page 4. Senator Tolentino, is that an anterior amendment?
Anterior amendment.
We're on page 4.
Page 4, line 15.
Line 15.
Page 4, with the permission of the sponsor. Page 4, line 15. After subsection I, insert a new subsection J, which will read as follows. Subsection J, develop, promote, and implement a comprehensive fire safety and protection program that aims to strengthen the capacity of the national government and LGUs, to build the fire resilience of communities, and to institutionalize measures for reducing disaster risk, and enhancing disaster and emergency preparedness and response capabilities, period. The BFP shall also empower existing community-based fire volunteer brigades and encourage the creation of the same in all local government units, period. And renumber the same accordingly.
Okay.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Objection. Hearing none, adopted. Still on page 4. Any other amendment on page 4?
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
why I still have the floor. This is not my original amendment, Mr. President. I may not be the proponent of this, but I was asked by my seatmate to to propound this, Mr. President. The proposed amendment would be wala tuloy ako, Mr. President. The proposed amendment, Mr. President, would be
Ito na yan.
very controversial, perhaps. That's why it's an amendment coming from Senator Bongo, Mr. President, who is not here on the floor right now. Mr. President, on page 4, after line 27, insert a new subparagraph that will read as follows, Mr. President. Subject to the provisions of Republic Act 10591 or Republic Act 6975 and the operational guidelines to be issued by the Department of the Interior and local government, comma. This is on section 3, page 4, line after line 27, comma, after the DILG, authorize the bearing of short firearms during fire emergencies and disasters only, comma, provided that appropriate training shall be undertaken by the DILG and the Philippine National Police, period.
Right, but this is
I accept, Mr. President.
Huh?
the
Ano raw?
minority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, considering that this is a very substantial amendment, may we request that we be given a printed copy or the exact wording be transmitted electronically so that we can study it before we act on it. Can we so request? Because again, this is a very substantial amendment. I don't recall this being discussed during the debates. I do not know whether this was taken up during the committee hearings. I doubt it very much. And this is just being inserted today. I think it is reasonable that we be given time to study this, consult resource persons and other experts, and therefore may we request that, number one, we park this amendment, take it up later if the proponent would introduce it again, because he says this is not his amendment, and he says it is very controversial, and therefore there is every reason for us to in time.
Yes.
Mr. President,
Yeah, in that case, Majority Leader, the
Yes.
higher preference would be a motion to table.
Yes, motion to table. But also just to remind the body, during the debates, Mr. President, a question was asked. I do not recall who asked the question, but the question was asked about that. If the BFP wanted to be armed. And the answer clearly given to us by the resource persons na ayaw nila na may baril. Ayaw nila ng baril. I clearly remember that, Mr. President. So just for the record, no, before we take this up later on, although it's tabled as of the moment.
Mr. President, point of order, Mr. President.
Senator Tolentino.
Yes, Mr. President, again, I reiterate that I am not the original proponent here, but my query, Mr. President, is that since this was already accepted by the sponsor,
Are you accepting
may
the?
we know the status of this?
Yes, Mr. President, I accept.
Are you accepted? I thought you objected.
So, Mr. President, my parliamentary role here, Mr. President, is to transfer the document supporting this amendment and let the sponsor comply with the request of the minority
Yes,
leader.
but what happened is that after you proposed it, the sponsor accepted, which I did not clearly hear anyway, but he accepted. But there is an objection, and they
Dispose of it, Mr. President.
so before we dispose, and we've already disposed it because the motion to table of the majority leader is a higher preference, and if there is no objection to the motion to table,
Maybe, Mr. President. Yeah, I could withdraw the motion, Mr. President. I mean, it's a very simple amendment. We just either approve it or reject it. I personally am not in favor of arming the BFP. So,
Yes.
but
there is Well, I understand that there is validity on the, on
Kasi
the,
usually ang ginagawa dyan nila, Mr. President, with due respect to our distinguished colleagues, when there is an operation of fire breakout in a particular community, they coordinate with the PNP. So the PNP, bumabantay ang PNP sa kanila while they are putting the fire out. Because even in the United States, the firefighters are not armed. They're armed with love. As a matter of fact, yan ang mahal na mahal sila ng mga Amerikano, yung firefighters. Yung police, galit na galit sila doon
but
in the United States. So
there are
that's the usual
different,
practice, Mr. President.
there is different situation in the United States, masyadong moderno, even mga towns nila eh. Dito sa atin, when you're talking of the provinces in some areas, in the provinces, mayroong mga nice people around. May mga insurgents. Ibang
Hindi po,
klase
yes.
sa atin eh. So, there is value, there is really value on the proposal. But again, the point of the minority leader is that it's a very controversial amendment. So instead of debating on it now and deciding on it, it's best that we table it. Senator Lacson is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This is just a point of clarification. Does the proponent of the amendment mention to be issued or just to possess firearm?
I think
Issue.
the word that I parroted, Mr. President,
Issue.
Possess.
aside from is authorize the bearing. The bearing is another word for possession, carrying, and you cannot be carrying something without having been issued.
No, not necessarily, Mr. President, because since you mentioned RA 10591, that is an act providing for a comprehensive law on firearms and ammunition and providing penalties for violations thereof, there's already Section 4 in that law that says, wait, I'm scrolling. Section 4. This pertains to possession of firearms, that any individual, as long as he is qualified, like gainfully employed, may psychiatric test, pumasa sa gun safety seminar, so any
A fireman will qualify.
fireman can qualify if he so applies, Mr.
So
President.
you're saying we don't need this
It's
proposal.
redundant, Mr. President,
We don't
because
need
there's
this,
already
in
an existing
the-
law that covers that. That's why I ask if it's if the firearms are to be issued or just to be possessed.
Mr. President,
If I may,
Mr. President,
while I still have.
Mr. President,
Well, it's actually on the floor is Senator Tolentino and the minority leader, Senator Drilon.
Mr.
So
President,
it's either of you. Go ahead.
my earlier point of order establishes that once this is accepted by the sponsor, he now carries the burden of defending this, Mr. President. Because he's the sponsor.
I accept that burden,
Because
Mr.
he
President.
already
No
accepted that, Mr.
no
President.
problem.
very clear,
I am gladly accepting
President.
the burden.
While this is now tabled, he is now the
problem.
proponent, Mr. President. That's parliamentary procedure here, Mr. President.
Right. Well, all right. The minority leader, in the form of a suggestion that you be given copies of the printed proposal instead of acting on it, the presiding officer is constrained not to adopt the motion right now because of the suggestion. So therefore, the motion to table was suggested. The majority leader filed it, and I think it's best that we leave it that way at the moment.
Yes, Mr. President. I will submit the documents to the sponsor, and through the sponsor, the written amendment, proposed amendment, will be submitted to the minority leader.
no, and to the rest of the senators.
Yes, Mr. President.
Also,
yes, Mr.
yes,
President.
Yes, Mr. President,
So all the members of the Senate.
For the record, we have not accepted the amendment yet as a body. So
Yes,
it
yes.
is now tabled for discussion.
Yes, correct. That is the
Yes, Mr. President,
Senator Villanueva.
before we just leave the topic, Mr. President, and I'd like to air out and echo the manifestations made by our majority floor leader that indeed during the period of interpellations, hindi ho natin narinig ito, and gusto ko lang hong i-put on record, Mr. President, if indeed the BFP had this change of hearts, Mr. President, that they wanted to be armed. Because if you look at the measure itself, Mr. President, on page 4, letter K, instead of them very clear, Mr. President, they are requesting assistance of the Philippine National Police, Armed Forces of the Philippines, or any other agency of the government, including government-owned and controlled corporations, in exercising its powers and functions, Mr. President. And I don't think we are giving away the law enforcement powers to our firefighters, Mr. President. Just to put that on record.
Nevertheless, the important point was raised by Senator Lacson, which is they can. We need not put it in the law. Oh, may batas na ganun eh. Yeah, Senator De La Rosa, go ahead.
Mr. President, I just would like to put on record that the statement of the majority leader regarding the firefighters' acceptability on arming themselves. I just would like to correct that the statement should go like this. Hati sila, Mr. President. Hindi sila lahat ayaw, hindi naman sila lahat gusto, but I don't know the percentage of division, but some of them wanted to be issued with firearms and some of them doesn't want. So that's the real score, Mr. President. And I just would like to put it in record that this amendment is born out of the request coming from Malacanang, from the President, that his intention was to arm the Bureau of Fire Protection personnel with short firearms, Mr. President, because he wanted to make this personnel available to support the law enforcement operations of the PNP and the AAP, Mr. President. Aside from the fact that during the per experience, during the Zamboanga siege and Marawi siege, kawawa yung ating mga firemen doon na pagbagsak ng bomba, nasunog yung building, tatawag yung frontliners doon ng mga tropa ng bombero to suppress the fire, and these firemen had nothing to protect themselves except the fire hoses. Ang gusto lang ng Presidente na mabigyan sila kahit short firearm man lang para makalaban sa mga ganong sitwasyon. And also, Mr. President, during fire incidents at the fire scene, this is a very common happening wherein yung mga siraulong tao mangangagaw ng hose ng mga fireman. At yung fireman naman ay maraming fireman na nasasaktan dahil may mga itak itong dala na gusto nilang agawin yung hose, unahin yung kanilang bahay na basain kahit malayo pa sa sunog dahil nga gusto nila na masave yung bahay nila. So kahit na malayo sa order of yung pagbuhos ng tubig, inaagaw nila. Yung fireman naman natin, walang dalang armas, hindi sila kinatakutan. So kung magkaka-armas itong mga fireman, takot na itong mga siraulo na guguluhin na itong mga fireman. And Mr. President, additional reason bakit gusto natin armasan yung mga fireman is that alam niyo, Mr. President, darating yung panahon, and it's very near already, that pag-shift ng focus ang ating military, ating armed forces of the Philippines from insurgency, from counter-insurgency to external threat, lalong-lalo na sa threat natin ngayon sa West Philippine Sea. And the problem of insurgency will be treated as a purely law enforcement problem and no longer a military problem and shall be transferred to the PNP. Now, kung ang PNP natin ay masyadong occupied, busy, na nagkakandak ng internal security operations, hihingi sila ng suporta sa Bureau of Fire na sila muna magmaman sa mga police stations, sila muna magmaman sa mga kalsada, sila muna magmaman sa police visibility doon sa kanilang area kasi yung mga police ay aakyat sa bundok at makipaglaban sa mga NPA. So yan po ang nakikita ni Presidente dahil noon pa man, Mr. President, naging practice na talaga natin, huwag na tayo magbase sa ibang bansa. Sa atin lang, sa Pilipinas, na yung fire talaga at yung police ay inseparable yan noon. Maraming instance na nag-operate ang kapulisan sa bundok kasama ang fire, may isyong armas. So, yun lang po ang ating purpose dyan, na sana makasuporta yung fire natin kasi we are now nearing the end of this insurgency problem. At gusto ni Presidente na diinan ito na bago yung term niya, matapos yung problema ng insurgency, mag-focus lahat ng pulis doon sa problema ng insurgency. So, yung fireman makatulong na mag-assume sa kanilang mga law enforcement duties sa poblasyon, Mr. President. So, yun lang po ang intensyon.
Senator Poe has been seeking the floor. We waited until you were finished. So, Senator Poe, you are recognized. Wait, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, ako, nagpapasalamat ako sa proponent ng batas na ito. Dati din ako naging public order chairman at inaamin ko na marami talagang dapat ayusin doon sa Bureau of Fire Protection. At maraming salamat that you're taking this up. Maraming natutuwa kay General Baton, Mr. President. Masipag siya. Pero dito sa pagkakataon na ito, ako po ay talagang tutol. Unang-una, naintindihan ko na pag may mga pasaway sa mga pinupuntahan ng mga may sunog, may mga kawatan din dyan na umaagaw ng kung ano-ano sa ating mga bumbero. Pero, hindi ba pwedeng i-coordinate na lang sa PNP na pag mayroong mga sunog na ganyan, samahan na lang sila kasi hindi lamang yan pag binigyan mo yan ng barel, may kasama dyan na training kung paano gamitin ang baril na yan, merong monitoring na kailangan pang gawin. Tapos kung sinasabi din ng ating sponsor na marami tayong mga kinakalaban ngayon at maaaring sa pagdating ng panahon ay sabayan na rin ang ating mga Bureau of Fire Protectors. Hindi po yun ang intensyon ng kanilang trabaho, hindi po yan ang kanilang mandato. Didagdaganin yung PNP na pwede nating makipagsapalaran sa mga pangangailangan nating domestic na mga hamon. Pero, Mr. President, para bigyan pa sila ng baril para gawin ang kanilang trabaho, parang hindi naman yata naaayon yan sa kanilang sinumpaang tungkulin at mandato. The mere fact that 50% of them are ambivalent about this, are not sure about whether or not they should have guns, is a big indication that they themselves know the limit of their mandates. Mr. President, pag binigyan natin ng baril yan, dadagdag pa yung budget natin because training is important, number one, before they can handle guns. Number two, also the responsibility of handling guns. Pag meron dyan, alam mo, sa isang batalyon, meron isang siguro bulok na prutas dyan. Madadagdagan na naman ang kailangan natin i-monitor dahil baka magwala pag bagong taon o meron na namang makaaway sa kanto. Alam niyo naman, gusto ko yan ang sponsor natin kasi mabait naman at alam ko, susulong niya yung gusto ng Malacanang pero responsibilidad din natin, nalagyan naman ng hangganan kung sa tingin natin ay medyo nakakalagpas na ito sa intensyon ng mandato nila. Maraming salamat po.
Anyway, I don't think we should prolong the agony.
Yes, Mr. President.
Because the majority leader, you have something to say?
Yeah, I withdraw my motion to table, Mr. President, because
You're withdrawing
yes, Mr. President,
your motion to table.
it's quite a controversial measure. I mean, quite a controversial amendment. I think we should just decide now to already clear the air and move forward, Mr.
Yeah, so
President.
anyway, I have not banged the gavel based on your motion to table.
Yes, Mr.
So the status is that the proposal has been presented, the sponsor accepted it, but the body has not approved it, you know, and I have not banged the gable on the matter. The minority leader asked for a copy. The copy was given. As far as the presiding officer is concerned, I am satisfied already with the explanation of Senator Lacson that we need not put it in the law. They can be armed if they want to, and we need not put it in the
Yeah,
law.
under the firearms, our firearms law,
Oh,
any
so
individual who can
what is
comply.
the pleasure of the body then?
So, Mr. President, the amendment has not been withdrawn,
Hmm.
and the proponent has accepted the amendment. There is an objection, obviously, from many of our colleagues,
Hmm.
and therefore, Mr. President, I move that we divide the House on the issue.
All right. Well, it'll be difficult to get the ayes and nays because
we
of
have
the
to do it,
virtual
to do it,
presence.
yes, Mr.
We will just
Nominal voting, Mr. President.
nominal voting, and we will ask them to say their vote of whether they approve of the amendment or
Before
not.
that-
The President Pro Tem is asking for the
And
floor.
also
Then we'll
Senator
recognize
Cotto
Senator
afterwards.
Pimentel. Go ahead, Senator Recto.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I did take this up during the period of interpellations. And the response of the sponsor then, when I asked how many countries in the world allow their firemen to be armed? And at that time, the response to me was that they don't know of any country that their Bureau of Fire or firemen are armed. So we will be the first in the world now. Having said that, Mr. President, this is such an important issue. I support the BFP modernization program and I have provided some amendments to this bill. But the problem is, assuming that this portion passes, then the totality of the measure to many of our colleagues might not be supported. In effect, the amendment says here that part of the modernization program is to arm our Bureau of Fire, our firemen. Ngayon, pistola, short arm. Kung water pistol, payag ako, Mr. President. Dahil mas may pag-asa pa ang water pistol mapatay sunog kaysa sa bala. Mr. President. So
But
it is such an
way-
important issue, yes.
You sound, Senator Recto, you believe that the proposal will win?
No, all I'm saying is that we are making a
As I said,
manifestation.
let's not prolong the agony.
Yes, the
Di ba?
sponsor may lose the entire bill and win an amendment, but may lose the entire bill, Mr. President, later on down the road. Sayang naman yung pinaghirapan natin on the BFP modernization program. So
Right.
this issue is that important in this particular bill, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Yes, Senator Pimentel is recognized.
Mr. President, I am checking my email inbox. The wording is not yet with me. So the wording is very important because we need to know if the comment of Senator Lacson is applicable to the proposal. Wala po akong kopya. Saan po yung wording?
Our colleague from my Silingan, my neighbor from Cagayan de Oro, the actual important message there is the issuance of firearms. So the amendment was to issue firearms to the BFP.
No, Mr. President.
The bearing
Mr.
of
President.
firearms.
Yeah,
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Aside from issuance, bearing.
Hindi, pero-
Mr. President.
Mr. President, tapusin ko lang yung point ko, sir.
President.
Sige, go
Mr.
ahead.
President.
Senator Pimentel still has the floor. Go ahead.
Because I heard the minority leader move for electronic sending of the proposed amendment. So wala pa po sa inbox ko. So
Mr. President.
wala akong copy.
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
I am withdrawing that request and I am raising an objection to the amendment and therefore move for the division of the House.
That is shortening the agony.
Mr. President,
So Senator De La Rosa, go ahead.
yes, Mr. President, before we divide the House, hoping that I can still get at least additional vote, I just would like to react to the statement of the Senate Pro Tempore, Senator Ralph Recto. Yes, I said that wala pa kaming narinig na ibang bansa na inaarmasan yung fire department nila. But I just would like to correct that statement, Mr. President, because mabilis mag-research yung mga tao ng yung mga staff ng proponent natin ng itong amendment na ito. And na-find out natin, Mr. President, na in the United States, several states such as Georgia, Kansas, Ohio, and New York have passed legislation to allow firefighters to carry concealed weapons on duty. Texas is the most recent state to move in this direction. So hindi lang po tayo nag-iisa, Mr. President. May mga states sa United States of America na may legislation talaga allowing them to carry firearms during fire suppression operations, Mr. President.
All right. Anyway, let us. There is a motion to divide the house already, and automatically we need to do so. So please, the EDP, open the connections so that the secretariat will hear the votes. The ayes and nays. Those in favor of the amendment of Senator Tolentino.
I move for.
I beg your
I think
pardon?
it would be better to get nominal vote, Mr. President.
That's right,
I move for
that's
the
right.
nominal vote, not
That's
ayes and
right.
nays. So one by
Those
one.
who will vote in favor of the amendment will say yes, and those who are not in favor will say no. All right. The secretary will conduct a roll call vote.
Roll call vote. The honorable senators Angara,
Sabi.
Angara,
Angara.
Angara.
I was on mute, Mr. President. I abstain, Mr. President.
Abstain.
Stain, Binay,
No.
no. Getano,
Sino?
not on the, she's not
Cayetano,
yet.
no vote. Go ahead.
De Lima, De La Rosa,
Yes, Mr. President. Yes.
Okay lang.
Rilon,
No.
Gatchalian, Go,
Yes po.
Gordon,
No.
Ontiveros,
Nay.
oh, yun. Lacson, Lapid,
Rapid.
not logged on.
No vote.
Marcos,
Abstain.
Pacquiao, Pangilinan,
Ano, Pacquiao?
no.
No.
Pangilinan,
No.
No.
Pimentel III, not logged on.
Wala.
Check
Pimentel.
the inbox. No vote.
Senator Pimentel. Checking his email. Vote. He has no vote.
Po,
No.
No.
Not-
He did not vote.
he did not vote.
No.
Who?
Po,
Oh,
no.
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 Recto,
No.
Revilla Jr. Not logged on. Tolentino, yes.
Si Cayetano. Pia Cayetano. Senator Cayetano. What is your vote?
No.
No.
Tolentino, no. Villanueva.
No, Mr. President.
Oh, sorry. Tolentino, yes. Villanueva, no.
Again, no, Mr. President.
Villar.
Huh?
No.
Villar?
Not logged on. Zubiri. No. Senate President Soto III.
Yes.
Talo siya.
As the count of the chair, there are 4 in favor, 2 abstention, and 13
Negative.
the motion is lost. You may proceed, page 4, Senator De La Rosa.
Thank you, Mr. President, for
For my vote.
for your vote. Thank you so much. Although I lost the division of the House, Mr. President, it's very important for me to know that the biggest pillar of the House is with me. So no problem. I will lose all the other parts of the House, but the biggest pillar of the House is with me. I have no problem. I'm so happy, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Of course, I will always vote for my chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am a very happy loser. I am not a sore loser at this time. Very happy loser.
No, but please be assured, no, that the point raised by Senator Lacson, the Bureau of Fire should be aware of that. They may. We need not put it in the law, but they may, based on the law that was mentioned earlier. All right, you might proceed. Page
Yes,
4.
Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. President, just to add to that, you're absolutely correct.
Wow.
We can request the PNP to issue them PTC, permit to carry. They just go through like any civilian, any one of
Correct.
us here who have firearms. It can be done, Mr. President, without explicitly putting on the law.
Yes, yes, correct. Anyway, proceed. Page 4. Anything, any more amendments on page 4?
Mr. President, on section 4, on page
Page 5.
5, Mr. President,
Mm.
line 7, delete the word apparatus and insert the phrase facilities and equipment. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, still on section 4, subsection A, on page 5, line 10, delete the phrase local government units and change it with LGUs. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Also on page 5, line 10, after the word units, insert the phrase provided that priority shall be given to municipality with no existing protection services. Hence, section 4A will now read as Fire Protection Service. The modernization program shall include the establishment of fire protection service, including the establishment of rescue hotlines in all LGUs, provided that priority shall be given to municipality with no existing protection services. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, still on section 4, under subsection B, on page 5, line 11, delete BFP and insert modernization program. I so move.
The modernization program. Anyway, any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Still on page 5, line 12, after the word modern, insert the phrase firefighting force. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Hence, section 4B will now read as force restructuring and organizational development. The modernization program shall develop the BFP into a compact, efficient, responsive, and modern firefighting force with the capability to implement Republic Act number 9514 within 90 days from the promulgation of the implementing rules and regulation of this act. The BFP shall recommend and submit to the secretaries of the DILG and the Department of Budget and Management the revised organizational structure and staffing pattern for officers and personnel of the BFP. The BFP shall design and establish a qualification upgrading program for the BFP officers and personnel in accordance with the Civil Service Commission's rules and regulations. I so move, Mr. President.
Yes, anyway, hearing no objection, adopted.
Mr. President, still on Section 4, under subsection C, on page 5, line 21, delete the sentence, the modernization program shall upgrade existing fire protection equipment and services and acquire of new equipment for fire protection, and insert, upon the effectivity of this act, the existing fire protection equipment and services of the BAP shall be upgraded through the acquisition of new and modern equipment, including but not limited to vehicles and personal protective equipment. On page 6, line 2, delete the word weapons. Hence, Section 4C will now read as capability, material, and technology development. Upon the effectivity of this act, the existing fire protection equipment and services of the BAP shall be upgraded through the acquisition of the new and modern equipment, including but not limited to vehicles and personal protective equipment, provided that the acquisition of new equipment shall be synchronized with the phase-out of uneconomical and obsolete major equipment and systems in the BAP inventory. I so move, Mr. President.
You remove the word weapons. No?
Yes, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, still on Section 4 under subsection D. Mr. President, on page 6, line 4, delete the phrase within the BFP after the word services. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, still on page 6, line 9, delete the phrase first to third class.
Mr. President, if I may,
Okay.
Mr. President. Anterior, Mr. President.
Senator Villanueva, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. With the indulgence of our distinguished colleagues, sponsor, on page 6, line 9, after the word cities, insert a proviso, provided that each EMS unit to be established shall be comprised of ambulance with adequate medical equipment and qualified and trained personnel such as, but not limited to, ambulance, crew, and drivers. If it is acceptable.
Wait, that is after the amendment of Senator De La Rosa. Will you repeat your amendment first, Mr. Senator De La Rosa? That is not an anterior amendment.
It's a, kasi was in line
What
10.
what line are you already? Line 9,
We have just finished
line 4.
page 6, line 4, Mr. President.
Yeah, and
And line
then
9.
what is the next one?
What's your next one?
What is your next?
Next one.
The next one is page 6, line 9. Delete the phrase first to third class and change municipalities to municipality and cities to city.
In every municipality and city.
Yes, Mr. President.
That is your proposal.
Yes,
Period.
Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. And then
Yes,
the
Mr.
proposal
President.
of Senator
Yes,
Villanueva
sorry,
thereafter.
Mr. President. I thought that was an interior amendment.
So
My-
you
my
have
bad,
already
Mr.
read into the records your amendment. What does the
Yeah.
sponsor say?
I happily accept that very good amendment, Mr. President.
All right. Any
Thank you,
objection?
distinguished sponsor. Thank you.
Hearing none, adopted. Still on page 6. Any amendment on page 6?
Mr. President, on section 5, are you okay, Mr.
Page 6, Mr. President. Yes.
Yes.
More, Mr. President. On page 6, line 11, Mr. President, replace the comma after the word facilities and delete the word hire. And on the same page, Mr. President, delete lines 12 to 15 and replace with the following provision. Internationally accredited training consultants and advisors may be hired after the determination of the non-availability of a Filipino who is competent, able, and willing to provide the same expertise in order to accelerate the personnel development program. A new appointed uniformed personnel of the BFP shall undergo a mandatory training program. The BFP, in coordination with the Department of Health and the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, shall provide necessary trainings for its EMS, which include but not limited to infection control and exposure, emergency vehicle response, incident rehabilitation, critical incident stress management, response to hazmat, response to mass casualty incidents or MCI, response to vehicle accidents, among others. That is the proposal, Mr. President.
Yes, and there is there is a period after facilities. What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you again to our distinguished colleague sponsor. Thank you.
Then still on page 6. Any other amendment on page 6?
On page 6, Mr. President, line 19.
Line 19. Go ahead.
Insert, it shall contain the following. A,
After Congress.
yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
It shall contain the following. A, personal strength and inventory of facilities and equipment of the BFP. B, modernization projects and activities under the program to be undertaken and the particular component and corresponding objective to which such projects relate to. C, priorities, schedules, and phases of implementation of modernization projects and activities. And D, estimated average cost of each modernization project or activity to be undertaken. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, on section 6, subsection A, on page 7, line
Page
2.
7.
Page 7, line 2.
All right.
Delete the phrase lease and lease purchase agreement and insert or other contractual agreements with local or foreign suppliers and contractors in the implementation of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, on page 7, line 7, delete PNP and change it to BFP. I so move, Mr. President.
PNP, BFP. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. Still on page 7.
Mr. President, on page 7, line 4, after the word obligational, insert the phrase or contractual.
Or
This is-
contractual?
or contractual. This comes from, this amendment is coming from Senator Lacson, Mr. President.
Any objection? Yes, so the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Occupational authority is a technical term. Is a multi-year obligation authority is a technical term in budgeting, which is authorized by the department, which is issued by authority of the DBM. And the insertion of that other word may render this document unidentifiable. The multi-year obligation authority is an accepted technical term to authorize the entry into contracts for several years for a project to be completed. And that obliges the DBM to provide appropriation on a yearly basis until the multi-year obligational, pursuant to the multi-year obligation authority, it issued. Now, I do not know whether the insertion of that phrase will change that technical word or wording.
Senator Lacson is recognized.
Since I was the one who gave Senator De La Rosa that particular amendment, Mr. President, the multi-year contractual authority is used on cost-based budgeting. But we do not know if we will go back to the multi-year obligational authority, meaning not cost-based system. So, and Senator Dillon has a point. No, instead of just inserting or obligational, we just carry the whole phrase or phrases. Multi-year obligational authority or multi-year contractual authority.
Because of the redundancy of the use of the word authority, can we look at the possibility of putting it first like, upon issuance of a multi-year contractual or obligational authority by the
as-
department?
Mr. President, but as Senator Dillon said, these are technical terms.
Hindi, kaya nga, yung obligational authority will be retained. Yung contractual, ilagay sa harap unless it gives
I leave it to the
priority.
body, Mr. President. What I'm only saying is that Senator Drilon is a point because these are two different technical terms used by the
Okay.
DBM.
All right. So what does the
One is MICA and one is MIOA.
what
Mr.
is the what does the minority leader say? The proposal of
I have
the
Yes.
obligational
We have no
authority or
objection.
contractual authority by.
Yes, I have no objection to that. We accept
All right.
the amendment, to our
All right.
amendment.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, this amendment is from Senator Recto on Section 7. On page 7, line 15. Replace the word and figure 3 and parenthesis 3, close open parenthesis, with the word and figure 10. Parenthesis, close, open, close parenthesis 10. I so move, Mr. President.
10 in words and figures.
Yes, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 7, line 19, insert a new section Code of the Philippines of 2008 shall be transferred to a new trust fund to be known as the
Sino?
BAP Modernization Trust Fund. It shall be administered by the Chief of the PNP, Chief of BFP, correction, in accordance with existing government budgeting, accounting, and auditing rules and regulations. The BFP Modernization Trust Fund shall be used exclusively for the implementation of the BFP Modernization Program as provided for in this Act, including all expenses necessary for the procurement of facilities, machineries, equipment, and services, provided that expenses chargeable against the trust fund shall include salaries and allowances for BFP personnel. The BFP Modernization Trust Fund shall be sourced from the following. Letter A, appropriations for the revised BFP Modernization Program as provided in Section 10 of this Act. Letter B, 80% share of the BFP from all taxes, fees, and fines collected pursuant to Republic Act number 9514, otherwise known as the Revised Fire Code of the Philippines of 2008. Letter C, proceeds from the disposal of excess and/or uneconomically repairable equipment and other movable assets of the BFP. Letter D, funds from budgetary surplus, if any, as may be authorized by Congress. Letter E, loans, grants, bequest or donations coming from local and foreign sources, specifically earmarked to be used for the BP Modernization Program. And F, letter F, all interest income that accrues to the trust fund. The amount allocated shall be released to the BFP based on the objectives of the BFP Modernization Program as provided for in this Act, provided that fund releases charged against the trust fund shall not be subject to any ceiling by the DBM. Succeeding sections shall be numbered accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon was asking for the floor earlier, and then we will recognize Senator Drilon. No? But just a editorial amendment. Isn't that trust fund Section 8 better placed before the period of implementation? It should be Section 7 instead. In period of implementation should come thereafter. But nevertheless, let's recognize Senator Gordon. Go ahead.
Mr. President, so as not to lose the thought of the current point, I'm willing to wait until you finish this present point because maybe Senator De La Rosa forgot that I had an amendment and he had already agreed to incorporate it, but apparently it wasn't incorporated. So I would have to go back to page 6, letter E of section 4, whichever is the pleasure now of the Senate President, to continue the current point or allow me to go back later.
Let's dispose this first, and then we'll go back to your amendment. The minority
Thank you,
leader is
sir.
recognized. Sorry.
Yes. Again, this is a very major amendment. I do not know that we have discussed this previously. So can we table this and can we be favored with an electronic copy of the proposed amendment so that we can have an opportunity to review? And we promise, Mr. President, that the next time this is on the floor, we will be able to comment on this proposal.
Is that okay, the Senator De La Rosa?
No problem, Mr. President.
All right. So we table the proposed amendment, and then before we move on, we go back to page 6. As Senator Gordon, you have an anterior amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, before the session, my staff and the staff of Senator De La Rosa had a meeting, and they promised to incorporate my proposed amendments, but apparently they overlooked it. So I would like to go back to it now, Mr. President, with all due respect. And in page 6, letter E of section 4, line 11, after the word personnel, please insert the phrase, quote, and BFP volunteers, close quotes. Continue on, and in line 14, after the word BFP, insert the phrase, quotes, and a new BFP volunteer, close quotes. And then continuing on, lastly, in line 15, after the word program, insert the following sentences. The mandatory training program shall cover both BFP personnel and BFP volunteers. The Bureau of Fire Protection shall encourage and promote volunteerism and shall develop guidelines for the enlistment and training of BFP volunteers. The reason for this, Mr. President, is we're always running short of funds, and there's no better way to continue some form of citizenship participation, Mr. President, on something so basic that when your neighbor's house is on fire, you will probably help your neighbor. But in this particular case, we're institutionalizing volunteerism into the law, Mr. President. After all, in America, Mr. President, as of 2018, there's a total of 1,115,000 career and volunteer firefighters. Out of this number, 745,000 or 67% are volunteer firefighters, and 370,000, 33% are career firefighters. So this not only reduces the cost of operating the BFP, but creates a core of people who will always be able to go at any time, anywhere, to attend to fires, Mr. President. And all he has to do is present the fact that he has a properly trained BFP volunteer, and he can do it in Manila, he can do it in Zambales, he can do it anywhere else, Mr. President. So the amendment, and so it will finally read as follows, Mr. President. Letter E of section 4 of the bill shall now read as follows. Human resource development, hyphen, the modernization program shall include training, no S, I'm sorry, I forgot that. Training, I don't think there's a plural for training. It's already there. Training for BFP personnel and BFP volunteers, which is the amendment. And establish training facilities, hire internationally accredited training consultants and advisors. Experts of equal qualifications cannot be secured locally to accelerate the personnel development program, period. A newly appointed and uniformed personnel of the BFP and a new BFP volunteer, and that's the amendment, a new BFP volunteer, shall undergo a mandatory training program, period. Then the amendment continues. The mandatory training program shall cover both BFP personnel and BFP volunteers, period. The Bureau of Fire Protection shall encourage and promote volunteerism and shall develop guidelines for the enlistment and training of BFP volunteers. I submit, Mr. President.
Before the sponsor reacts, I suggest that the staff of Senator De La Rosa and staff of Senator Gordon sit down because he amended this earlier. This is not how it looks anymore. It was changed by Senator De La Rosa earlier, Senator Gordon. So
Yes, Mr. President.
we don't know how to amend that particular portion that you're discussing now because he practically changed that earlier. So what do you say, Senator De La Rosa?
Can I ask for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President?
Yeah, I think it's best that you discuss it.
Yes, Mr. President.
You know, yeah, the session is suspended for a few minutes. resolution. The sponsor, Senator De La Rosa, have you straightened out the problem with the proposed amendment of Senator Gordon?
Yes, Mr. President. For the record, Mr. President, the current wordings of Section 4A reads as follows. Human Resource Development. The modernization program shall include trainings for BAP personnel and establish training facilities. Internationally accredited training consultants and advisors may be hired after the determination of non-availability of a Filipino who is competent, able, and willing to provide the same expertise in order to accelerate the personnel development program. A newly appointed uniformed personnel of the BAP shall undergo a mandatory training program. The BAP, in coordination with the Department of Health and Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, TISDA, shall provide necessary trainings for its AMS, which include but limited to infection control and exposure, emergency vehicle response, incident rehabilitation, critical incident stress management, response to hazmat, response to mass casualty incidents, response to vehicle accidents, among others. To harmonize the amendment of this section, we would like to propose to delete the entire section 4A, 4E,
Letter E.
and replace it with human resource development. The modernization program shall include the development of a comprehensive training program for BAP personnel and BAP volunteers, including mandatory training for new entrants and newly appointed personnel of the BAP, and establishment of training facilities. Internationally accredited training consultants and advisors may be hired after the determination of non-availability of a Filipino who is competent, able, and willing to provide the same expertise in order to accelerate the personnel development program. The BAP, in coordination with the Department of Health and Technical Education Skills Development Authority, TISDA, shall provide necessary trainings for its AMS, which include but limited to infection control and exposure, emergency vehicle response, incident rehabilitation, critical incident stress management, response to hazmat, response to mass casualty incidents, response to vehicle accidents, and among others. The amendment of Senator Villanueva is still retained.
Does that conform with the amendment of or the proposed amendment of Senator Gordon?
Yes, Mr. President, we already included the BAP volunteers in this section, Mr. President.
All right, then the proper procedure then is, okay, let's listen to Senator Gordon first before we propose the procedure. Go ahead, Senator Gordon.
Mr. President, there is no difference between the amendments. In fact, it's a very good amendment by Senator Villanueva. It expands the capabilities of the BFP, Mr. President. The only thing that makes it even more worthwhile is the fact that you add BFP volunteers, and that the volunteers will always be there, Mr. President, as in my last proposal. The mandatory training program shall cover both BFP personnel and BFP volunteers. The BFP shall encourage and promote volunteerism and shall develop guidelines for the enlistment and training of BFP volunteers. There is no contradiction, Mr. President. It can stand together, Mr. President.
So the proposal of Senator De La Rosa that he just read encompasses and conforms with that idea, Senator Gordon.
In part,
Your
Mr.
amendment
President,
already.
in part, Mr. President, I just want to add the last paragraph, which is just a couple of sentences. The mandatory training program shall cover both BFP personnel and BFP volunteers. The Bureau of Fire Protection shall encourage and promote volunteerism and shall develop guidelines for the enlistment and training of BFP volunteers. Mr. President, the reason why I add that is the importance of volunteerism in anybody's culture, in any country's culture. And I'd like to make sure that this Senate promotes that, principally because even in America, it is already an all-volunteer army. And for that matter, even in Israel, it's an all-volunteer, it's also volunteer army, Mr. President, and they always rely on volunteerism.
All right.
And in the case of fire, we would like to make sure that volunteerism is part of the philosophy of running a fire department, Mr. President.
All right. Therefore, the proper procedure now, Mr. Majority Leader, is for you to file a motion for reconsideration on letter E, because it was already adopted as proposed earlier before the Senator Gordon amendment. So maybe entertain a motion for reconsideration on letter E, page 6, number line 10.
Yes, Mr. President, I move to reconsider the proposed or the adopted amendment so that we can reopen this for new amendment.
Any objection? Hearing none. Reconsideration of the page 6, letter E. So how does it read now? And with us incorporating the amendment of Senator Gordon, Senator De La Rosa, can you please read now letter E as proposed?
Letter E. Human Resource Development. The modernization program shall include the development of a comprehensive training program for BFP personnel and BFP volunteers, including the mandatory training for new entrants and newly appointed personnel of the BFP and establishment of training facilities. Internationally, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended. Go ahead, Senator De La Rosa.
Letter E, Human Resource Development. The modernization program shall include the development of comprehensive training program for BFP personnel and BFP volunteers, including mandatory training for new entrants and newly appointed personnel of the BFP and BFP volunteers, and establishment of training facilities, period. The BFP shall encourage and promote volunteerism and shall develop guidelines for the enlistment and training of the BFP volunteer. Internationally accredited training consultations and advisors may be hired after the determination of the non-availability of a Filipino who is competent, able, and willing to provide the same expertise in order to accelerate the personal development program. The BFP, in coordination with the Department of Health and Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, TISDA, shall provide necessary training for its EMS, which include but limited to infection control and exposure, emergency vehicle response, incident rehabilitation, critical incident, stress management, response to hazmat, response to mass casualty incidents, response to vehicle accidents, among others. That's all, Mr. President. I so move, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? There is none. Adopted. Let's now go back to page 8. Oh, no, page 9. Oh, no, sorry, page 7.
7.
So this was suggested to be parked earlier. Are we ready? The trust fund.
Yes, Mr. President.
Minority Leader, or you? Yes, Senator De La Rosa.
There was a motion a while ago by the minority leader that this portion is to be studied first, Mr. President, to be parked, that
Yeah.
they can study some more.
The trust fund.
The trust fund, Mr.
Yes,
President.
and study the possibility of placing it as Section 7, no? Instead of,
Yes,
Section
Mr.
8,
President, as
before
you...
period of implementation.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right, therefore, are you ready with the other one? The
Yes, Mr.
part
President, with the permission of our dear colleague, my good friend, compadre, and my fellow Mindanao, if it's okay.
All right.
Mr. President, on page 3, line 16,
Page 3, line 16.
unless it's amended, Mr. President. On page 3, line 16, after the words "other pertinent documents," delete the phrase may be deemed necessary by the BFP and replace it with listed in the Bureau's Citizens Charter pursuant to Republic Act number 11032 or the Ease of Doing Business and Efficiency Service Delivery Act of 2018. Yung po yung Citizens Charter,
Yeah,
Mr. President, yun yung listahan talaga ng hiningi.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
All right.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none, adopted.
And then finally, Section 3D will now read as follows. Require building owners to submit plans and specifications of their respective building and other pertinent documents as listed in the Bureau's Citizens Charter pursuant to Republic Act number 11032 or the Ease of Doing Business and Efficiency Service Delivery Act of 2018 and evaluate the same to ensure compliance with Republic Act number 9514 and other applicable codes and standards. For this purpose, a fire safety evaluation clearance shall be issued as a prerequisite for the issuance of the building permit in accordance with the Republic Act number 11032. So yun po yung magiging final ano.
Yes,
Okay lang
assist.
ating chairman.
So we only
I
have
accept,
one.
Mr. President.
Thank you so much.
We only have one parked.
Maraming salamat, Mr. President, to the sponsor.
Sino? Minority Leader, yes. Senator Dillon, go ahead.
Yes, I have earlier suggested, just as a matter of enhancing the ease of doing business, that the safety evaluation, fire safety evaluation clearance, and the issuance of the building permit be contained only in one document para hindi pa balik-balik. That would be consistent with the desire to streamline the permit granting. In other words, it should not be a prerequisite, but in one certificate, you issue the building permit and the fire safety evaluation clearance. We suggest that. How does the sponsor feel about that, so that we can propose the appropriate amendment?
I would have to ask my resource person, Mr. President, because I'm not sure if these two requirements are solely being produced by the Bureau of Fire. Maybe the local government units are involved in the other requirement, Mr. President, the building
Correct.
permit.
Correct. But for the record, building permits are given by the LGUs.
LGUs, yes, Mr. President. So they are two distinct requirements, Mr. President.
I withdraw, Mr. President. I withdraw the amendment.
All right, thank you, Senator Drilon. So we have only one part. The issue of the trust fund, Minority Leader, are you ready with to address this?
I have not even seen, I'm sorry, sir, but I am still awaiting the electronic copy. Maybe I have it here, but I'm sorry, but I don't have the electronic copy of the proposed creation of modernization trust fund.
May we ask the staff of Senator De La Rosa to make sure that the Minority Leader and the rest of the members of the Senate are given a copy of the proposed amendment?
As of last night, Mr. President, they were already sent to the staff of Senator Drilon, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. President, can I just ask for a suspension and then we call the bill again after 1 hour so that we can act on it.
Yeah. Okay, Senator, the Majority Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. To hasten the proceedings, we still have a couple of sponsorship on the floor for some measures. We can suspend consideration temporarily and then come back to it after sponsorship of other measures.
All right, but make sure that Senator Drilon and the rest of the members have a copy already of the proposal.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right.
So move, Mr. President. Move to
Any
suspend
objection?
temporarily the consideration.
Hearing none, consideration of the measures temporarily suspended.
Yeah, Mr. President. I move to, next in line is the resolution of Senator Ping Lacson, but with this permission, Senator Ping, is
Yes,
it all
Sen-
right if Senator Manny Pacquiao just sponsor a measure? It's just a quick speech. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special order Senate Bill number 2077.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
To consider Senate Bill number 2077.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 2077, an act creating the Philippine Boxing and Combat Sports Commission and for other purposes.
Mr. President, may we recognize a distinguished colleague, Senator Emmanuel, the Pambansang Kamao, Manny Pacquiao.
Right, Senator Manny Pacquiao, the champion, is recognized to sponsor the measure, and the Minority Leader is eagerly waiting.
Thank you, Mr. President. Matagal na itong bill. Nagsimula po ako maging boksingero noong ako po ay 12 taong gulang pa lamang, Mr. President. Naranasan ko ang hirap at pinagdaanan ng mga boksingero na tulad ko. Marami sa kanila ang naging baldado, naghirap at namatay. Lumalala na po ang estado ng ating mga boksingero at manlalaro ng combat sports dahil kulang sila ng supervision, regulasyon at suporta mula sa ating gobyerno. Inihalal ako ng taong bayan at inilagay sa posisyong ito kaya dapat lamang natulungan ko ang kapwa kong mga boksingero at manlalaro ng combat sports upang mapabuti ang kanilang kalagayan habang pinaglalaban ang karangalan ng ating bansa. Mr. President, this is my advocacy. Naniniwala din po ako na kung magkaroon lamang ng tamang gabay at suporta ang ating mga boksingero at manlalaro ng combat sports mula sa gobyerno noon pa, baka mas marami pa sana silang maibigay na karangalan sa ating bansa. Mr. President, I need your support. Kailangan ko po ang suporta ng taong bayan, lalong-lalo na po ang suporta ninyong mga kapwa ko senador. Mr. President, we have pointed out the importance of creating a separate commission in our first interpellation in 2017. That creating a separate commission will focus on steer the skills and talents of the youth towards its proper direction to provide, implement the necessary welfare, incentives, and benefits that is long overdue to all professional boxers and combatants who have brought honor and prestige to our country, Mr. President. this measure was already passed during the last Congress, Mr. President, and we have incorporated all the concerns of our colleagues in the different agencies. This afternoon, I humbly rise to sponsor the bill I filed, which is Senate Bill number 193 and Senate Bill number 805 filed by Senator Ramon Bong Revilla Jr., which aim to create the Philippine Boxing and Combat Sports Commission. The time has come for boxing and combat sports to have a separate commission to give it stability and a clear sense of direction, Mr. President. Having said this, I urge you, Mr. President, and my distinguished colleagues to support this measure. Thank you, Mr. President. Matagal na ito, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Tumubo na yung kamatis sa bakuran.
I confirm, Mr. President, nakadaan na po ng 15 rounds boxing yan sa 17th Congress. At it's back again with us here. And I'd like to also ask the sponsor and author if I can be made also a co-author of the measure, Mr. President. So show support to our compadre and Pambansa Kamao.
All right.
If it's all right to do.
Likewise, Senator
Together with Senator Tolentino,
and Senator De La
Senator
Rosa.
Bato, Senator Lacson, and of course, if the Senate President would also.
Yes, sure. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and to all my...
And also Senator Dulon is raising his hand.
Oh, he's only
I
raising
really
his hand.
recognize Senator Dulon.
He's only raising his hand. Do not count him yet.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Yes, we confirm that we have debated on this bill in the 17th Congress, and we passed it as a body at the time, and now it is being refiled. I want to manifest that I am supporting this bill. If I can be made a co-author, it would be an honor for me. So may I request that our name be included as a co-author of the measure that is being considered. Thank you, Mr.
Answer
President.
for you, Senator Pacquiao, with open arms.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you to our minority floor leader.
Thank you,
Yes.
colleagues.
So we also have one other colleague who wishes to co-sponsor, but Senator Revilla just called up and said he would just like to insert it to the records, Mr.
All right.
President, for 2077.
The co-sponsorship will be submitted.
So to allow our colleagues to study the measure further, move to suspend consideration.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration suspended.
So I'd like to ask Senator De La Rosa if the amendment is ready together with our minority floor leader.
Hindi.
Or hindi pa po?
I
Yes.
don't think so.
Ready na po. Ready na daw
Go
po.
ahead,
si
Minority Leader.
But before that, Mr. President, may I manifest something that
I move, Mr. President, to resume consideration of the measure, Senate Bill number 1832.
All right. Hearing no objection, consideration is back in order. Senator De La Rosa before the Minority Leader.
yes, Mr. President, thank you. I missed out something, Mr. President, when Senator Tolentino injected his bearing of firearms amendments. I have one paragraph here that I failed to read on the floor, Mr. President, and this pertains to Section 3 under subsection K.
Page.
On page 4, Mr. President, page 4.
Page 4.
In lines 20 to 27, delete the entire subsection K and replace it with letter K, request assistance from the Philippine National Police, Armed Forces of the Philippines, or government agency or instrumentality, including government-owned and or controlled corporations and LGUs, in exercising its powers and functions, including the use of the agency's personnel and facilities upon approval of the head of the agency concerned. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. All right. Senator Dillon is recognized.
Yes, Mr. President, we are in possession of the electronically transmitted proposed Section 8 For the record, may we request the good sponsor to read it now in the record so that we know what we are approving, and I have no objection so long as what I'm reading is reflected in the record as Section 8. So may we request that it be read and introduced formally again by the sponsor.
All right.
Yes, Mr. President.
Except that we want it, if possible, on a Section 7 before the period of implementation. Anyway,
No,
go ahead.
no problem.
Reading trust fund.
Section 7 then.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Mr. President. Section 8, BFP Modernization Trust Fund. The trust fund created pursuant to Section 13 of Republic Act Number 9514, otherwise known as the Revised Fire Code of the Philippines of 2008, shall be transferred to a new trust fund to be known as the BFP Modernization Trust Fund. It shall be administered by the Chief of the BFP in accordance with the existing government budgeting, accounting, and auditing rules and regulations. The BFP Modernization Trust Fund shall be used exclusively for the implementation of the BFP Modernization Program as provided for in this Act, including all expenses necessary for the procurement of facilities, machineries, equipment, and services, provided that expenses chargeable against the trust fund shall exclude salaries and allowances for BFP personnel. The BFP Modernization Trust Fund shall be sourced from the following. Letter A, appropriations for the revised BFP Modernization Program as provided in Section 10 of this Act. Letter B, 80% share of the BFP from all taxes, fees, and fines collected pursuant to Republic Act Number 9514, otherwise known as the Revised Fire Code of the Philippines of 2008. Letter C, proceeds from the disposal of excess and/or uneconomically repairable equipment and other movable assets of the BFP. Letter D, funds from budgetary surplus, if any, as may be authorized by Congress. Letter E, loans, grants, bequests, or donations coming from local and foreign sources, specifically earmarked to be used for the BFP Modernization Program. And letter F, all interest income that accrues to the trust fund. The amount allocated shall be released to the BFP based on the objectives of the BFP Modernization Program as provided for in this Act, provided that fund releases charged against the trust fund shall not be subject to any ceiling by the DBM. I so move, Mr. President.
What does the minority leader say?
No objection, Mr. President.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Meron pa, sir?
Meron pa isa.
Mr. President, yes, it should be Section 7. It
Yes.
should be Section 7 rather than Section
It
8.
should be Section 7. What the gentleman from Mindanao read is
I accept,
Section
Mr. President.
7, and then Section 7 becomes Section 8, and so on and so forth. And then I think you have another amendment.
So this is supposed to be Section 9, Mr. President. So it will become the new Section 8.
If it's after, wait, if it's after the, yes, it should be. It should come before the implementation.
Yes, Mr.
Senator
President.
Recto,
Yes, Mr. President.
wait. No, nawawala si Senator Recto. There you go. Wait. There you go. Senator
Yeah,
Recto.
thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd like to thank the sponsor for accepting some of our amendments. One in relation to the time frame from 3 years to 10 years, and just for the record, so that it enriches our records in the Senate. We propose this amendment so that there's a better chance that we would be able to fund the implementation of the BFP modernization program. The collection roughly a year is about 3 billion. Okay, so at least kung mabibigay talaga sa kanila yung 3 billion na yan that they collected anyway, then that is the seed capital to fund the BFP modernization program. I just wanted to put that in the record so that there's no confusion on the purpose of this particular amendment. And I think that so thank you for that, Mr. President. And I think the sponsor of the measure now will do another amendment that we propose with regard to the local equity. So thank you, Mr. President, for that. Thank you.
Yes, correct. All right, just for the record, the trust fund is section 7. The new amendment that you will introduce will be section 8, so that the period of implementation becomes section 9, and so on and so forth. Section 8, you may now proceed, Senator De La Rosa.
Yes, Mr. President. Insert a new section 8, which shall read as Section 8, local equity in the BFP modernization program. City and municipal governments shall be authorized to use the respective share from all taxes, fees, and fines collected pursuant to Republic Act number 9514, otherwise known as the Revised Fire Code of the Philippines of 2008, for the following purposes. Letter A, operation and maintenance of local fire stations. B, construction, repair, rehabilitation, and improvement of local fire stations. C, acquisition of lots and right-of-way for local fire stations. D, acquisition or installation of firefighting equipment, including fire trucks and aerial ladders. E, procurement of personal protective equipment, self-contained breathing apparatus, and other firefighting tools. And F, other relevant programs, projects, and activities as may be identified by the BFP in accordance with Section 4, subsections A, C, and D of this Act. Local government units shall be authorized to implement development programs and projects complementary and supplementary to the BFP modernization program, to be charged against the allocation for local development projects as provided in Section 287 of the Republic Act number 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, as amended, provided that development programs and projects implemented by LGUs in accordance with the Act shall be included in the respective local development plans and annual investment programs. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? The minority leader is recognized.
Just for clarification, we note that it is only the city and municipal governments who are authorized to use their share from all taxes and fines collected under the revised fire code. Just a question for lack of information. There are no collections by the provincial governments, because we notice it's only city and municipal governments. Why are provincial governments not included? Are they not collecting anything?
No, Mr. President. Only the municipalities and the cities. The 20% goes to the municipalities and cities, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We just wanted clarification.
All right. Any objection? Chair hears none. Adopted. All right.
Mr. President, on page 7, delete the entire section 8 and replace it with section 10, appropriations. The amount necessary to implement the provisions of this act shall be sourced from the BFP Modernization Trust Fund as provided for in section 8. In addition, the annual appropriations for the BFP Modernization Program shall include amount necessary to support the funding requirements for all modernization projects submitted to Congress. The funds to be appropriated to implement the provisions of this act shall be included in the General Appropriations Act under BFP. And I would like to correct, Mr. President, it's no longer Section 8, it's already Section 7, as we have agreed a while ago. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, this amendment is from Senator Gatchalian and Senator Ricto on Section 11, on page 7, after line 22. Insert a new section to read as Section 11, strict application of ease of doing business and efficient government service Delivery Act of 2018, Section 10 of Republic Act number 11032, and its implementing rules and regulations shall be strictly enforced in the processing of any application or renewal of fire safety permits, clearances, and certificates. Any law to the contrary notwithstanding, fire safety inspection certificates shall not be required to process and approve local business permits for professionals, freelancers, self-employed persons, individual contractors, and one-person corporations who are engaged in service activities and who register their respective residences as their principal place of business. Mr. President, on Section 9, on page 8, lines 3 to 6, delete the entire Section 9 and replace it with Section 11, implementing rules and regulations. Within 60 days from the effectivity of this act, the DILG and BFP shall, in consultation with government agencies concerned and public and private stakeholders, shall formulate the necessary rules and regulations for the effective implementation of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
The objection. Hearing none, adopted.
Lastly, Mr. President, replace the title with an act strengthening and modernizing the Bureau of Fire Protection and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none, adopted.
That is all, Mr. President. Thank you. Maraming salamat po sa mga nag-amend. Lalo-lalo kay Senator Recto and Senator Gatchalian and Senator Tolentino for that matter.
What about
Thank you, Mr. President.
What about Senator Dillon?
Senator Dillon is automatic, Mr. President. He's the
Automatic,
perpetual amender, Mr. President.
Automatic, ha? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very happy for the chairman that he was able to hurdle this very important measure that's been pending so many Congresses. So we'd like to congratulate him that we can get this passed. Mr. President, with that, I move to close the period of amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of amendments closed.
With that, Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1832. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill 1832 is hereby approved on second reading.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Congratulations to our dear colleague. We move to suspend consideration for the third reading next week.
Consideration is suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ready ka, Senpi? Okay, ikaw na. Mr. President, I move that we take up possibly the last item on our agenda. I move that we take up and resume consideration of PS Resolution number 559. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. PS Resolution 559 or Committee Report 186 is hereby considered.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Panfilo Ping Lacson, our distinguished colleague from Cavite, to sponsor the measure and to interpolate the distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Franklin M. Dulon.
To continue sponsoring the measure, Senator Panfilo Lacson is recognized, and to interpolate the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Dulon. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Would the good gentleman sponsor yield the floor for a few, for just a few issues in relation with the report submitted?
Thank you, Mr. President. Any intervention coming from the distinguished Minority Leader is most welcome, simply because he consistently provides wisdom and substance to any measure being deliberated on the floor. So yes, this representation most willingly yield to the distinguished Minority Leader.
Yes, there are only, I will limit our intervention and the interpretation just on two issues. The criminalization or the non-criminalization of red tagging activities, and the other on this on the NTF LCAP. But before we raise the questions, Mr. President, let me spread into the record our acknowledgement that the report submitted by the good sponsor is a balanced report, I must assert. It is objective and all angles have been covered and discussed, and for that we extend our congratulations to the good sponsor. There are just two issues that we would like to raise this afternoon. The first would be on the matter of why red tagging is not being criminalized. But before we go into that, just one minor issue, and this is the issue of the very controversial General Antonio Parlade, whose comments and red tagging caused this investigation by the Senate and the committee report submitted today. First, Mr. President, what is the position of General Parlade in the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or the NTF LCAC?
He is the designated spokesperson of the NTF LCAC, and in concurrent capacity, he is the commanding general of the Southern Luzon Command of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Mr. President.
So he has been designated as the spokesperson. We read in media before that he was also designated as executive director.
Executive director. Let me find that out, Mr. President, and validate if he is indeed designated further as the executive director of the NTF LCAC. But as far as this representation is concerned, he is the spokesperson of the NTF LCAC, Mr. President.
Yes, there were reports in media, and that's why we're trying to confirm from the good sponsor if in fact he is also an executive, if he is also the executive, General Parlade is also the executive director of NTF LCAC.
I just got this information that it's General Allen Capuyan, who is the executive director of NTF LCAC, Your Honor.
Not General Parlade.
Not General Parlade.
Okay. And the chairman of the NTF LCAC, according to Executive Order number 70, is the President of the Republic of the Philippines. Is that correct?
The President of the Republic of the Philippines, Mr. President.
And the National Security Advisor is the Vice Chairman.
He is the Vice Chairman, Mr. President.
Yes. Is the AFP Chief of Staff a member of the task force?
There are 12 members. He is a member, Mr. President.
He is a member. Now, the good sponsor is aware that under the Constitution, no member of the armed forces in the active service shall at any time be appointed or designated in any capacity to a civilian position in the government.
That is correct, Mr. President. And that's contained in one of our recommendations that Lieutenant General Antonio Parlade must hold only a position in the armed forces since he is an active officer of the armed forces of the Philippines. And for many reasons, he should not be holding two positions in the NTF LCAC as well as in the armed forces, simply because there might be some confusion. And whatever he says as the spokesperson of the NTF-ELCAC necessarily would reflect on his superiors in the armed forces of the Philippines, if not the armed forces of the Philippines itself, Mr. President.
I'm glad to hear that, the recognition of that difficulty. But I would like to think that the sponsor will agree that the designation as a spokesperson not only poses problems on his personality, but also could be questioned on the ground that we are designating an active military officer in a purely civilian office, which is prohibited under Article 16, Section 5, Paragraph 4 of the Constitution. Would the gentleman consider that favorably?
That is correct, Mr. President. And it may be questioned before the Supreme Court. However, in the past, we also witnessed several active military and police officers holding concurrent positions in some civilian entities, Mr. President.
But
It's only a matter of maybe it's only a matter of questioning it before the Supreme Court, and the Constitution is quite clear, as you mentioned it. So it is our position that after we adopt this committee report, then we should send a copy to the Chief of Staff, Armed Forces of the Philippines, as well as to the Secretary of National Defense. So this violation of the Constitution should be rectified, Mr. President.
Yes, I concur with the statement of the good sponsor that this, what appears to be a violation of the Constitution, must be rectified. But I believe, and we submit, Mr. President, that the suggested rectification should be part of the report. And I would like to think that the rectification would be to how would you call this? That the General Parlade should no longer be the spokesperson of the NTF-ELCAC, because that designation is of doubtful validity. We should include that as an amendment to the or as a recommendation of the chamber when we send out the report. Would the gentleman consider that proposal?
Yes, Your Honor. As a matter of fact, it is found on number 7 of our recommendations. It says, as a matter of policy, we should prevent the potential conflict between the policies of NTF-ELCAC and the mandate of the security sector by engaging a spokesperson who does not hold concurrent mandates in the security force. This should be a prerequisite for a spokesperson in the faithful performance of his official duty. It is found on number 7, Mr. President.
Yes, at the appropriate time, would the good sponsor consider an amendment which will clarify the position of the chamber as agreed upon, that indeed there is ground to question the constitutionality of the designation of General Parlade, consistent with the recommendation number 7. In other words, we will just clarify that not only as a matter of policy, but a matter of a constitutional provision.
Definitely, Mr. President, I will accept a much simpler language to clarify this matter, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. That indeed would help us in clarifying this issue now. So we leave it at that. And the second issue is the matter of the recommendation of the good gentleman in his report that there is no need to specifically punish as a criminal, as an offense, the red tagging. Mr. President, yes, Senator, sir, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Yes, with the permission of the two gentlemen, Senator Pangilinan.
Yes, thank you. Just on the earlier matter, we would just like to make a manifestation also, and perhaps with the permission of the good sponsor, a clarification. We read in the papers about 2 weeks ago that, and the AFP Chief of Staff, Sobihano, was quoted that the statements of General Parlade, in relation to the statements of General Parlade, he was quoted as saying, and this is the problem precisely of having different positions, that General Parlade can be held to account for his being Solcom chief, but it's another matter altogether being spokesperson of the task force. Can you clarify, or did you come across this particular statement of the AFP Chief of Staff? Because that's precisely the problem that I think the minority leader has raised. How can a active enlisted official, not enlisted, but an officer of the armed forces be accountable as in one position, but not accountable in another position as an active officer?
Yes, Your Honor, I could not but agree with your observation, and I heard that too, Mr. President, that Lieutenant General Cirilito Sobehana, the newly designated Chief of Staff, made that statement. And it is it's also mentioned in the committee report. I would just read it for the record, Mr. President. The said case presents a conflict of interest prejudicial to the military. It is found on page 63, Mr. President. Prejudicial to the military sector's established chain of command and prescribed disciplinary powers. More so, Lieutenant General Parlade, donning military uniform in his interviews and other public representations, obviously stands for the armed forces of the Philippines, even in his capacity as the spokesperson of NTF-LCAP. Hence, his pronouncements are inevitably and instinctively attributable to the military sector. And then in the last paragraph, we also mention the following. A clear policy by the AFP leadership must be made on how to deal with the accountability of a member of the chain of command, meaning in the armed forces, who speaks on behalf of an entity outside the command structure of the military organization. So definitely there's conflict of interest and there's confusion. And yes, I believe Lieutenant General Sobihana mentioned that he cannot make him accountable for his action or pronouncements as the spokesperson of NTF-LCAP because he's just a member of that civilian entity. Because he's not speaking on behalf of the armed forces. And there goes the confusion and the conflict, Mr. President. So I agree with you that indeed there's a problem.
Yes, thank you. It is actually an anomalous situation that you are under the chain of command as an active officer, and yet you cannot be held to account because you have been designated as a soldier, as an officer, to be part of the or spokesperson of the LPCAP. The chain of command is a serious.
Who is chaired by the Commander-in-Chief.
That is correct.
Which is a higher position than the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines.
And therefore, the anomalous situation and the danger is a lower-ranking officer of the Armed Forces of the Philippines will now bypass the Chief of Staff. And that is precisely what the chain of command should is all about, precisely. And the other point is, are we encouraging a lost command in that regard? And we know how the AFP as a professional organization should never tolerate any transgressions in the chain of command. Is that not right?
That is correct, Mr. President.
Yes, and we'd like to thank the sponsor and the minority leader. We just wanted that clarified and placed on record. Again, the professionalism of the Armed Forces of the Philippines rests on its respect for and recognition of the chain of command. And I fear that with this kind of anomalous situation, the discipline and the professionalism of the armed forces may be compromised, and therefore it should be called out in the committee report. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
As a matter of fact, Mr. President, I believe Lieutenant General Cirilito Sobihana will be facing the Commission on Appointments. And even before we are able to transmit a copy of the committee report as adopted, maybe we should ask him to act immediately or with dispatch to remedy this anomalous situation, Mr. President.
All right. Again, yes.
Just one last point.
Senator Marina.
Thank you. Just one last point. It sets a dangerous precedent. And the Armed Forces of the Philippines, as a disciplined professional organization, cannot afford to have someone outside of the chain of command. And a Armed Forces chief saying, I can hold him accountable as as the most senior. I can hold him accountable for one act, but I cannot hold him accountable for another. This is a break in the chain of command and should not be tolerated. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished sponsor and the minority leader.
Thank you, Your Honor, for your intervention.
Senator Dillon, yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Mr. President. Mr. President, on page 60, recommendation number 1 of the committee report, it asserts that there is right now no legal definition of what constitutes red tagging. Is that a correct reading of the report, Mr. President?
Yes, the only definition, known definition of red tagging was from Justice Marvick Leonen, Mr. President, in his dissenting opinion in Zarate versus Aquino. Saan ba yan?
We are aware of that, Mr. President. Yes, and that is why.
Unfortunately, Mr. President, it is just a dissenting opinion and it cannot be considered as a legal definition of red tagging, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, I think it is within the powers of this chamber to come up with a definition of what is red tagging. Yes, it is in the dissenting opinion. It only means that the definition there is not binding because it's in dissenting opinion. But it doesn't mean that this chamber, in the exercise of its independent judgment, cannot adopt that dissenting opinion of Justice Leonen as part of the law. In fact, Mr. President, when we were debating on the Anti-Terrorism Act, I remember that in our exchange, we agreed that there was no accepted definition of what is terrorism, and therefore we adopted, if I recall correctly, the various definitions and put them together and came up with our own definition.
Section 4. That is correct, Mr. President. Under Section 4.
That's correct. If Section 4 was not based on any decided opinion of the Supreme Court, but we adopted it as the chamber's opinion as to how it should be defined, and nobody can question that because I'm sorry, and of course it is being questioned, but at the initial stage, at least when we are crafting the law, there is a presumption that what we were doing is within the bounds of the law, and it is in that same context that I am suggesting that we should adopt the definition of Justice Marvick Leonen in Zarate versus Aquino III, because it is the most comprehensive and logical definition of red tagging, unless we can find in other reference materials another definition which would suit our judgment, Mr. President.
As the distinguished minority leader mentioned, this is a comprehensive and complete and simplified definition of red tagging or red baiting, Mr. President. And just for the record, Justice Leonen defined red tagging as, quote, the act of labeling, branding, naming, and accusing individuals and or organizations of being left-leaning, subversives, communists, or terrorists, used as a strategy by state agents, particularly law enforcement, He further said that for decades, red tagging, labeling individuals and groups as communists or terrorists has been a persistent and powerful threat to civil society and freedom of expression. He also described victims of red tagging as stereotyped or caricatured by the military as communist groups, making them easy targets of government, military, and paramilitary units. He went on by saying that red tagging creates a chilling effect on dissent among similar-minded individuals as they are vulnerable to attacks. Yes, Mr. President, when we finalize the committee report, as we will adopt it, hopefully, we can adopt this particular definition proposed by Justice Leonen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am happy that of the open-mindedness of the good sponsor on these issues, and indeed, it would not harm us. It would not harm the report, and in fact, it would be a good guide to the general public, to the security forces, to include that in our report for their guidance. It only shows that this chamber is conscious of what red tagging constitutes. Now, I'll go to the next point, Mr. President. The good sponsor stated in the committee report that there is no need to enact legislation to specifically prohibit, to specifically criminalize red tagging because there are already legal remedies under the existing laws. For the record, can the gentleman spread into the record what are these legal remedies that the gentleman had in mind and which is stated in the report, Mr. President?
Well, for one, libel, cyber libel, and then we also have RA 9851, passed, I think, in 2012 by ito. And also grave threats under the revised penal code. There are enough laws available to those who may be red tagged, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, they have already availed of the existing laws. They filed cases of even 3019, Article 3019 and 6713, Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act and Ethical Standards against several officials of the NTF-LCAC, General Parlado included. So they also have availed of the writ of habeas corpus, writ of amparo, writ of habeas data. In fact, the first petitioner in the writ of amparo filed was released on the same day that he was arrested, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is an accepted principle in criminal law or in law in general that the laws are designed to regulate the conduct of people so that a penal law is designed so that the acts which are punished by law will not be committed. Mr. President, with all due respect, we take the position that apparently these laws that are enumerated in our statute books have not served as a deterrent for the red tagging, because notwithstanding these laws, it would appear that the practice of red tagging is so prevalent in today's environment. And having said that, I think the good sponsor will agree with me that red tagging, as said in the report, really has chilling effects. Natatakot po pag nasabi kang ikaw ay komunista, even without basis. It is in that context that with all due respect, this representation sees the continued chilling effect of the red tagging, because mukha pong hindi deterrent ang present laws. Now, would the good gentleman be open to a recommendation that red tagging be punished separately? And of course, this has no retroactive effect because this could be a criminal statute and can only be prospective in application. The reason we are suggesting this is so that if the good sponsor agrees that the red tagging does not serve any purpose, then it should be prohibited and penalized. I would repeat, this would just be applicable to future acts so that we can have an effective law and a law which will effectively influence the behavior of people by penalizing red tagging. And maybe we can find a penalty, a solution which will make it an effective deterrent for its commission, because as we see today, the present laws are not an effective deterrent to the commission of red tagging if we consider this as something that should be corrected. That's our submission, Mr. President.
Based on the 3-day-long hearings that we conducted, and all the 3 hearings were also attended by the Senate President, and this was taken up, criminalizing red tagging. And the Senate President, I remember, mentioned that if we criminalize red tagging, we might as well criminalize passes tagging and other forms of tagging, Mr. President. As far as deterrent, I think it is not a deterrent only as far as Lieutenant General Parlade is concerned, because all the heads of the different security sector establishments that appeared before the hearings, before the committee, Secretary Lorenzana, Chief of Staff Gapay, even Director General of the NICA, General Monteagudo, General Esperon, testified that it is a matter of policy that the military establishment and the security sector itself and the NTF-LCAC will not engage in red tagging as a matter of policy. But, you know, it is unique to a person like Lieutenant General Parlade, and that's why he has been cited in this committee report so many times, Mr. President, short of censuring him, although we cannot do that because he has his superiors to impose sanctions on his actions, Mr. President.
The difficulty, gentlemen, if your honors, the difficulty here, we want to understand the point of the minority leader, but the difficulty is the fact that it was a media invention. The term red tagging was a media invention. It was never mentioned by any report or any military. They simply gave a report saying that these people are involved in the Communist Party of the Philippines and connected to the NPA. That is the report. Somebody from some media started calling it dead tagging. So how do we criminalize a media invention?
Mr. President,
Mr. President.
yes, Mr. President, in response, precisely the good sponsor earlier acknowledged the dissenting opinion of Marvick Leonen, Justice Marvick Leonen, which defined red baiting. And as we have agreed, while this is in a dissenting opinion, there is nothing that will prevent this chamber from adopting this as a definition, in the same manner that we have adopted as a definition in the anti-terror law, the definition of terrorism, which both Senator Lacson and myself could not find as in any statute books as being sufficiently defined. That is why, Mr. President, just in response to your statement, it has been defined as red baiting by Justice Barbiclion and in the case of Zarate versus Aquino III. And what I'm asking is maybe we can study we can recommend, the good sponsor can recommend that the chamber examines through its appropriate committee the enactment of a law which would prohibit and penalize red tagging. Please, I want to emphasize, Mr. President, that what I would like to see, with all due respect, is a recommendation by the committee that that the chamber should adopt a statute which would punish red tagging by itself. We are not in a position at this point to define exactly what are the punishable acts. Just the concept of red tagging being punished, the details of which can be defined with more precision in the statute, as this is a criminal offense. It's just a matter of principle that and messaging that the directive to the appropriate committee of the Senate to study the criminalization of red tagging. We are not saying that we cannot at this time define what are the elements, but just that concept of penalizing red tagging is what we would like to be included in the report, if that is acceptable.
With due respect to the distinguished minority leader, it is the position of the committee that if we penalize or if we criminalize red tagging, we might find ourselves in a slippery slope, which might, run afoul of protective speech, which is so enshrined in our Constitution. Mahirap na rin, Mr. President. That's why we have been very careful in our recommendation not to criminalize or not to recommend to criminalize red tagging, Mr. President. It found its roots in the United States way back in 1950, when citizens were told that anybody could be communists, teachers, journalists, labor organizers, were among the groups suspected of being infiltrated by the communists. Ang nangyari po dito, ito yung tinatawag nilang it became one of the dark ages for free speech and civil liberties. That's why we're so careful not to criminalize, because baka marami pang mga tagging na madamay which might affect the basic freedom of speech and expression, Mr. President. Anyway,
we are aware of that.
Studying further.
Yes,
To add to the proposal of the minority leader, so that anyway, you're proposing that it be studied by a proper committee.
That's correct.
Might as well incorporate also in the proposal, that they study that the layman's understanding of a person who is red tagged is that he is a suspected communist.
Yes.
Right? So therefore, pag tinawag kang suspected communist, gagawin natin i-criminalize natin yon. Therefore, pag sinabi ka rin suspected drug lord, i-criminalize din natin yon.
Yeah.
That is the problem there. So I think it's really needed, the suggestion should be studied very well.
Yes, that is why we are not coming to any conclusion. What we are just appealing is that we should not close the door to this study by already coming with the conclusion that we cannot criminalize. What I'm saying is, let us have the appropriate committee study it in more detail and recommend through a bill or a bill or a report of the committee that indeed indeed they are not in favor, or the committee would not be in favor of penalizing red tagging separate. That's all we're asking, that let us not foreclose that possibility of a bill being studied with all these concerns taken into account, Mr. President.
with that clarification, Mr. President, then yes, we will consider that it be studied further. What I understood on the earlier proposal was to recommend the
Yes.
committee report will recommend the criminalizing of red tagging, which I said I would not agree at this point in time. But if it is to study further the possibility of criminalizing or imposing penalties on red tagging, then we can do that, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, that would be acceptable to this representation, that it's a little opening to enable the chamber to take a good look and study this is acceptable to this representation. The good sponsor is correct that initially our proposal was to consider as a criminal act red tagging, but given the concerns of the Senate President and the sponsor himself, we are amenable to just an inclusion of a paragraph in the committee report which will say that the issue of criminalizing red tagging shall be subject to further study, taking into consideration all the views expressed of the chamber, Mr. President. If that's yes, that's if that's
As a matter of fact, we can insert it on recommendation number 1.
Yes,
Under
Mr. President.
recommendation number 1, Mr. President. We just find the space to insert the proposal or the proposition as advanced by the minority leader. We will find a space for that little proposal, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Yes, that would be all for my part, Mr. President, and I see Senator Hontiveros as raising her hand. So I now terminate my interpretation with the various agreements that we have arrived at on record, and I now yield the floor to Senator Hontiveros, who seeks to be recognized. Thank you very much, Mr. Sponsor, for your openness to the suggestions that we have made, and we do hope to see these amendments find its way in the committee report. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
As usual, thank you for your wisdom and your suggestions, Mr. President.
Senator Ontiveros recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the good minority leader. Actually, Mr. President, good sponsor, I'm not going to interpolate. I was just seeking to interject a couple of more points to the important and refreshingly collaborative interpellation between the good sponsor and the good minority leader. The good presiding officer, the Senate President, is correct. The term red tagging has received a lot of play in the media in the past months. But however, I would also like to make of record that in addition to that and before that, the United Nations itself has made an observation that red tagging, and they use that term explicitly, red tagging has a chilling effect on the legitimate work of human rights defenders and has muddled the space for debate, disagreement, and for challenging state institutions and policies. And lastly, Mr. President, a good sponsor, just for the record, as for other forms of tagging, for example, fascist tagging, it is, however, also observed that even any person or any high-ranking person in a society who is tagged in that way does not suffer from a similar chilling effect as that observed by the UN on the part of those who are red tagged. And even less so does it happen that those who are tagged with some other label are subjected to harassment or even worse. There's really a good sponsor, Mr. President, an asymmetry of power that makes red tagging a very disturbing concern for many of us in the Senate. And therefore, I appreciate that the good sponsor, the good committee chair, has really undertaken a quite deep inquiry into this and now has presented the chamber with this wide-ranging and also quite insightful committee report. Thank you, good sponsor. Thank you, Mr. President.
With all due respect to the distinguished lady from Panay Island, Mr. President, I may have to disagree that passive tagging has less chilling effect than red tagging. Once you are tagged as a fascist, you would be open to assassination
By the
plots
NPA.
by the NPA. So it does both have chilling effect, as a matter of fact, Mr. President.
Another one is when you are called a suspected drug lord. So you're a drug lord tagging.
Patay ka kay
Oh, patay
Senator
ka sa
Bato,
pulis.
Mr. President.
Oh, and it is a more chilling effect because the law enforcers can go after you, or they will fleece you with money. Diba? It's the same thing.
Indeed,
Anyway.
this is a very complex issue that we really have to study very hard before we even consider criminalizing, Mr. President.
Hindi, ngayon. The majority leader, the acting majority leader.
Senator Bato. Acting Tatanungin sana si Rizal, ba't siya nag-Vicente?
Majority leader is talking to the sponsor because, go ahead.
Suspension, Mr. President, I need to confer with the sponsor.
Yes, I understand there are one or two more members of the Senate who wish to interpolate, but because of the lateness of the hour.
Mr. President, I think Senator Ontiveros still has the floor, Mr. President.
No, she already made the manifestation.
Mr. President, after conferring with the good sponsor, Senator Lacson, and reiterating your comment that it's almost 7 o'clock, may I move to suspend because we have several other interpellators. I move to suspend consideration of Senate Resolution 559, Committee Report 186, Mr. President. I so moved.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is suspended.
Mr. President, several administrative housekeeping tasks, Mr. President. We are in receipt of a communication from Senator Grace Poe, Chairperson of the Senate Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currency, stating that she created a subcommittee in the Committee on Banks to tackle bills on government financial institutions, unified initiatives to distressed enterprises for economic recovery, also known as the guide bills, Mr. President. The communication further states that Senator Poe is designating Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, Vice Chair of the Committee on Banks, as chairperson, a subcommittee chairperson, to hear and sponsor the guide bills as a just a manifestation, Mr. President.
All right, we place that on record.
Mr. President, another administrative matter, and this has something to do with the Committee on Rules, Mr. President. I move to transfer from the Committee on Rules to the Committee on Health and Demography as primary committee and to the Committee on Finance as secondary committee the following Senate bills. Number one, Senate Bill 1619, creating the Novaliches General Hospital. Number two, Senate Bill 1620, creating the Panabo City General Hospital. Number three, Senate Bill 1725, increasing the bed capacity of Samar Provincial Hospital. And lastly, Mr. President, Senate Bill 1859, creating the Jose Lingad or upgrading the Jose Lingad Memorial General Hospital. These bills, Mr. President, were previously referred to the Committee on Rules pending transmittal of their House bill counterparts to the Senate. I so
Right.
move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
Mr. President, additional committee referral, Mr. President, I move to refer the following measures to the Committee on Ways and Means and Finance as the tertiary and fourth committee referral. These are the guide bills, Mr. President. Senate Bill 2048, number two, Senate Bill 2003, number three, Senate Bill 1646, and lastly, House Bill 7749. These bills, Mr. President, were previously referred to the Committee on Banks and secondarily to the Committee on Government Corporations. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, so referred.
Mr. President, there being no other matters to tackle, Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, that's March 8, 2021.
Any objection? Hearing none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, March 8, 2021.
Thank you, Mr. President.